We represent the people who have taken the chance. And we made a mistake, and then the Desert Inn corrects it and gives it back. There is a warm feeling here.
But you don't think everybody then will want their money back?
No. In the campaign, you make a clear distinction between the bold, who would be my wife and I, and then all the other schmucks who come here to see Wayne Newton.
I like Wayne Newton.
So, my number 4 is the...
Enema.
What did you just say?
You said Enema, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
did you say
Tom
Enema?
Tom York's Enema,
No.
the 15-minute short film created
First of
by
all,
Paul Thomas
enunciate
Anderson.
it so we know you're saying anima and not enema.
I'm sorry.
I heard Enema.
It's
Because that's two different things.
Well, they're literally like off by like 2 letters. So.
Well,
What happened to you? You lost your control.
I lost control.
Yes, you
Look
lost
at
your
you.
control.
You're fucking walking around like John Barrymore. A fucking pink robe and a fucking a cigarette holder. I lost control.
There is an unfortunate amount of comparisons between he and Daniel Plainview when it comes to buying of the land.
to be fair, though...
make a Disney version of There Will Be Blood.
I've abandoned my child! Oh, God.
Oh, I abandoned my child.
Smoke is billowing from behind the...
I'm finished.
That was like kind of a goofy. Anyway,
Bastard
I
in
will
a
say
basket.
I'd be
Caleb, what's your type?
Of girl?
No, of salad dressing. Yeah, of girl. What's your type of girl? You know what? Don't even answer that. Let's say it's black chicks.
Welcome into Film Tank, the weekly podcast that covers both new and classic cinema. On this episode of Film Tank, we discuss the host's top 6 favorite film conversations. If you would like to get in touch with Film Tank, you can always email us at filmtankshow@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Film Tank Show. And you can listen to all of our episodes on our website, filmtankshow.com, or on iTunes. And now, here are your hosts, Nick Cheney, Toussaint Egan, and myself, Alex Diekman. Hello there again, everyone, and welcome in to episode 196 of Film Tank. As always, I am Alex Diekman, with my usual friends, Nick Cheney
hey.
and Toussaint Egan.
Hello.
Hello. So cordial.
Yeah.
This is nice.
Yeah.
Good friends having a good time.
Yeah.
Man.
Thank you for welcoming us into to the Film Tank for the 196th time.
You're more than welcome, sir.
Yeah.
It's going to be nice to have us all just hanging out, conversing about films.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of that.
Speaking of that, we have an episode on the conversation that we did, and it was really early and it was really good.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That is factually correct. Mm-hmm. We did our second episode ever on the Gene Hackman film, The Conversation.
Yeah.
Hey.
It's funny how that works out.
Yeah.
We sure did.
Speaking of conversations.
Oh.
Uh,
Tell me more.
I know. Ooh.
Would you like to know more?
A Starship Troopers reference. There you go.
Yeah.
We also did an episode on that.
Yes, we did.
Okay. I don't remember which number it is, but that's probably fine.
That's all right.
It's out
Google
there.
it.
Yes.
Search through all of our archived episodes.
So, on this particular episode, though, we're going to do our first non-year in review top 6 episode in quite a while. It's been a couple years, at least. Maybe 2.5.
It's been a minute. It feels like it.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Well put, Toussaint.
Yeah.
And on this particular top 6 episode, we're going to discuss our favorite film conversations. So it's going to be different than the usual top 6 episodes we've done, where basically each pick is just kind of a thing or something that the person who created the list enjoyed. Where this is, there's all kinds of different variables at play. Which should actually bring some fun lists, I think. But also could also create some weird thoughts about things.
Yeah.
Depending on why a person picked a conversation. So that'll be good.
One of mine, I will say, is an unpleasant experience.
Is it a Lars von Trier one?
Maybe.
Spoiler, yes and no, in the sense that maybe that'll appear, but that's not what I was talking about.
Okay. Oh, I know you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to keep with the randomized thing we've had going on recently, which we were planning to do all these randomized things for our 200th episode coming up, thought we would keep with that and randomly decide which order we went in today. And Nick's name came up first.
What? That's so random.
Oh, we randomized it. That's the joke.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyways, now we've cleared that up. Nick, start us off, please.
Okay. For my number 6 comes from a little crime film from a man named Michael Mann.
Ooh.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
It's from his 1981 film, Thief, where Frank and Jesse have their first real date in the diner.
And boy, what a date it was.
It sure is. It's a 10-minute uninterrupted scene in which the two of them sit down, kind of exhausted by their, mundane lives, and as James Caan's performance as Frank basically kind of protests her into a relationship, and frankly, not in a creepy way. Like he's certainly pushy, but mostly in a way that just kind of he sees a connection that he shares with Jessie, played by Tuesday Weld, and he's trying to get her to take a chance on him, and it's kind of a grand romantic gesture by one of the least likeliest romantic people, And
Oh, yeah.
that's why it's just, for me, it's an electric scene between the two of them, and it's probably the closest thing on my list that veers almost into monologue, because it's mostly James Caan talking, but the scene doesn't work without Tuesday Wells' kind of exasperation and back talk to keep him going, because his angsty reactions kind of keep heightening every time she interjects.
It's been a while since we sat down and watched that film together, but isn't that the same scene where he shows her the postcard that's
Yes.
got all the fucking weird skulls and fucked
Yeah.
up shit on it? And I can't remember how he reasoned that and turned that into that girl eventually going out with him, but I was just like, that is a red flag if anything, but he made it into a slam dunk, and I don't know how he did it.
He did. No, I mean, that's the thing. He details his life in prison, and he kind of, I would say, very poignantly, repents that, the time wasted back then was also time well spent, because it let him envision what he wanted, and that's the only reason why he's acting so kind of vigorously in this moment, because he knows how little time that anybody has left. And yes, point out that postcard that he made, and kind of that proto vision board
That's a vision board, all right. Yeah.
And the fact that she kind of is won over, I think, is completely earned in the scene, and I just absolutely love. And obviously, it's a forebearer of Michael Mann sitting people down in diners and letting them hash things out. But for me, I feel like it's my personal favorite of his, because there's that element of romance, which almost feels like it's secondary in most Mann films, but in this one is crucial to understanding Frank and his motivation and just kind of everyday wherewithal. So, for me, it is the diner scene from Michael Mann's Thief.
Wonderful. Spoiler, I will not have a Michael Mann scene on my list.
Whoa!
Damn, that would have been the only thing I would have bet on.
And yet, so I did obviously put down the Bobby D and
Yeah.
Al Pacino scene. Because I ended up with about 23 specific conversations that I whittled down to 6. So it was on there, but for me, even though I love that scene and I love the movie Heat and I love Thief as well, even though I've only seen it once, it just did not pack the same punch that the other 6 did. So.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I will say one really quick, not honorable mention, but just a caveat, considering it's funny coming from me, but I did not purposefully or I should say I purposefully did not include any foreign language films.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, I felt like that could have been a category in and of itself. And also, it's as an American and English-speaking person, I can't even quite read into the performances in a foreign language film.
That's fair.
For this particular exercise in a way that I can with a movie speaking my native language.
Because we're talking about scenes that are a conversation, just singular. We're not talking about how they actually play into sort of an impression about the work as a whole.
Yeah, and just dialogue in general. So that said, if they were included, the works of like Abbas Kiarostami or Ingmar Bergman absolutely would have made my list. But because of that, they will not.
Well put. So my number 6 is, I think, the only. No, that's a lie. There's another one that also comes in the final scene of a film, but this one is the very ending of a film, and it is one of my favorite films of all time. Although a lot of my favorite films of all time are on this list, believe it or not, which makes sense. But this scene is a film that I've been lobbying for us to do an episode on. Maybe we did do an episode on. I don't remember at this point. I don't think we have. Maybe we have. I can't remember. Anyways, if we haven't, that's fine. But this conversation in this film is an all-timer for me. And that is the final conversation where it's all kind of laid out on the line between Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman at the end of The Prestige.
Oh.
So throughout that film, obviously both the characters of Alfred Borden and the great Danton, or what is his
Vincent
name?
Danton.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Vincent Danton.
No, that's his name. He goes by the Great Danton, but his name is something else, and it is totally escaping me right now.
Okay.
Anyways,
Ooh, what a trick.
woohoo! God damn it. So the great thing about that final scene is, and if you haven't seen The Prestige, I'll try not to
Spoiler.
Yeah, I'll try not to spoil.
Have
it.
we done an episode on The Prestige?
We have
yet?
not.
I was gonna say I don't think so.
That's crazy that we haven't done it.
But it feels like we should have.
Yeah, that's like one of my favorite films, one of your favorite
I know.
films. Yeah.
That is a film I like.
I was gonna say I don't think Nick hates it.
No, I actually quite enjoy it, but
Yeah. So, anyways, probably more to come on that film. So I'll try to keep it a little bit spoiler free, as that is a film that has a lot of twists and turns, which makes sense as it is a film about magic. But both of these characters have a heated rivalry throughout, and they're not huge fans of each other, but for different reasons. As early in the film, Hugh Jackman's character believes that Christian Bale's character tied a knot incorrectly and murdered his wife. Well, killed her, not necessarily murdered her. But as we see throughout the film, there's a lot of goings-on happening throughout them. But the great thing about the final scene in The Prestige is all of that is kind of wiped away as a certain action has happened that will end their connection together. So this is the last time either of these people will be seeing each other, and their lives have been intertwined basically for the previous, I don't know, decade or so. And the fascinating part about what is happening between the two characters is it's finally them being truthful with each other, where the entire film, the idea of deception is basically both of their lives. So there's never any real truth happening with any conversations that happen. It's all deception and lies and fluff.
And performance.
Absolutely, as is a big aspect of magic. So that is a fantastic finale to a film, as you have these two characters. One of them who attempts to have this front the entire film, the Hugh Jackman character, he now is definitely vulnerable at the end of this film, as he will no longer be seeing Christian Bale, as he will be departing, whatever that means. Anyways, so it's just a great, fascinating conversation between the two of them, because things are revealed between them that were previously secrets that they now are throwing on the table, and it's just a lot of emotion that comes out in a very, I don't want to say stale, but stoic scene. So there's just so much going on in this short 1.5-2 minute scene, And it also ends with one of my favorite lines in, I don't want to say any film, but films of the last, 15, 20 years, which is Hugh Jackman talking about why he became a magician. And it was the look on the crowd's faces, which is incredible because the entire film, all he's thinking about is outdoing him, but at the end of the day, he's, his brain is going back to why he's doing this job in the first place, which is attempting to wow people and excite them. And obviously, there's some regret happening at the end of this scene.
It took courage to climb into that machine every night. Do you want to see what it cost me? You didn't see where you are, did you?
You went halfway around the world. You spent a fortune. You did terrible things. Really terrible things, Robert. And all for nothing.
So it's a really, really good film. It's one of Christopher Nolan's best. Definitely a different level of effort, I would say, was put into this film than some of his newer films. And I'm not saying that he's not trying or anything like that, but I feel like he was putting a different type of energy into his films at this time than he is now. So if you ever want to see a really good film, go see The Prestige. But the ending scene between Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale is absolutely fantastic.
Yep.
I agree.
Okay.
So for my number 6 conversation, I was really surprised when I finally sat down and sort of tallied up the most memorable conversations that I really enjoyed, because originally I thought that this one would either be placed much higher, if not at the very top of my list. But when I sort of looked at everything as a whole, I'm just like, no, this still belongs in my top favorite conversations, but it's just it doesn't come together as well as the other ones that I'm mentioning on this list. So number 6 is the conversation in the 1997 film Gattaca between Vincent Anton Freeman and his brother Anton. So this is later on in the film, after the whole instigating action of this film is that Vincent is masquerading as another man, Jerome Morrow, in order to basically be inducted into this aerospace facility called Gattaca, so he can eventually go into space, right? But one of the things that throws a wrench into that right before he's actually going to be going on his own mission is that somebody's murdered, and so it almost induces this whole investigation, and then they find out that there is a person who is masquerading as another person possibly, and they might be on his tail, even though he's not. Vincent isn't the one who killed this guy, and so now he has to basically avert the police, who are also trying to find the actual murderer, and basically telling the whole story of how he actually got to that point. Kind of
it's been a long time since I saw this movie. It's been since our February favorites.
Yeah.
3 years ago.
Oh,
whatever
yeah.
it is now.
Yeah.
But in addition to masquerading the whole scene, he's also concurrently masquerading as he's pretending to be a different person, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
so he's doing a lot of work here.
Yeah, it's tonally, it almost feels like The Talented Mr. Ripley meets Logan's Run, almost the sort of sci-fi sort of veneer over it, but it's nothing like that. It's nothing as duplicitous as that, or insincere as that. And so basically, it turns out that one of the detectives is Vincent's long estranged brother Anton. We don't learn that until the very end. And he has actually been doggedly trying to find out who this person was, because he saw the picture of the person whose DNA was left over, and it turns out it was his brother. So he's trying to find and track down his brother. And so la-di-da-di-da. Turns out they find out who actually murdered the person. I won't tell who it is if you haven't seen it yet. But eventually, after hours, Anton confronts Vincent and basically gives this whole spiel about how their parents died, thinking that he had died himself because he was supposed to die of a heart attack at some point. And it turns out he survived, and that he has been masquerading as this other person, and he's trying to bring him into custody. And then it goes from sort of the respective like roles of these two men, with one of them being a police officer and the other man being an impersonator, and then it just gets more granular and gets more personal for the fact that it's really because Anton cannot accept that Vincent has come as far as he has and done something that so many people thought was impossible, and that some part of him still like harbors some resentment or animosity for the fact that he feels like even though he was made to be the favorite son because he was not only given his father's name, but also he was eugenically cultivated as most other people in the society were, Vincent was not, and that maybe Vincent has something that Anton doesn't. And so that was really, that for me is like a peak of that film. Like that's actually the moment right before the next scene, which is like one of my favorite scenes in that entire film. And it's one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite movie of like all the movies I've ever seen. It's my favorite movie of all time. And so that was why I was so surprised to like look back on that one like conversation and realize even though I love the film in its totality, I think that one scene, even as exemplary as it is, it does not measure up alone compared to the other like conversations I have, even though I might like Gattaca more than these other films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And that's great because it makes me look forward to the rest of your list too, because you have the same sort of kind of moment that I had with the Heat conversation where I decided, this is great.
Right.
But these ones mean more to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
By the way, also, too, I didn't look it up, so I'm really happy about that, but Hugh Jackman's name in the Prestige is Robert Angier.
Yeah.
So, fucking did it.
Yeah.
Didn't even need the internet.
You dog, you.
Phew. Okay, so that was a good start, I feel like.
Yeah.
I was concerned that we were going to fumble all over ourselves.
No,
but
that's coming up.
we're fucking professionals here, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to number 5.
Number 5. I actually will say, just to piggyback of what Toussaint just said about Gattaca, I excluded anything from Magnolia from my list because that is a movie of conversations.
Wow.
Yes.
He totally feels like cheating. And
it's my favorite movie of all time.
It's picking between your favorite children.
So at a certain point, I was just like, why even bother championing it?
I mean, I guess it's not necessarily like a elongated conversation, but the scene between John C. Reilly and William H. Macy, which ends with him saying, "I have so much love and I have nowhere to put it."
Yeah.
I would have bet money that would have been on your list.
Yeah.
There were a million things I could have chosen.
Or even not even, but how about the Frank T.J. Mackey conversation
with
scene?
the interviewer?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, those were pretty much like I could have made a list of only Magnolia.
Number one with a bullet, yeah.
And because of that, I decided to make a list without Magnolia.
Okay, that's fair.
So in case that seemed like it's shockingly absent, that is why.
Yeah.
So, all right, my number 5 is, I think, the only one on my list that is humorous in nature.
Okay.
So this is a comedy conversation. Although I laugh at a few things in another one, but that's for another day. This comes from a 1985 movie by Mr. Albert Brooks, written and directed, and of course starring him, which he co-wrote with, as he often did, with his writing partner Monica Johnson. This is the movie Lost in America, in which him and Julie Haggerty play a couple who are very much a product and also champions of a very Reagan-esque capitalist system, as they are upper middle class. Who have very cushy jobs and decide...
Yuppie wasps.
Yeah, I mean, they're not... It's right on the cusp in the sense that they haven't quite reached the 1%, because if they had, they never would have had this idea anyway. They don't realize that that's why they're disaffected and not happy.
Yeah.
So they decide to essentially leave their job and their home and drain their life savings and put it all into what they call, very humorously in a different conversation, their nest egg. And they decide to take an RV across the world and just live out on the road as they, quote-unquote, easy rider it. Now... very early in their journey, or I should say halfway through, they find themselves in Vegas, which is hilarious because as people who are trying to, go it alone and they would go to the most garish and money-tastic place on earth. And as Albert Brooks bids goodnight to his wife because he's going to retire for the night, he wakes up to find out that his wife, played, as I said, by Julie Haggerty, has accidentally gambled away their nest egg in the few hours that he was sleeping. In order to counterbalance this and hopefully solve this problem, he asked to plead with the casino manager. And the following scene ensues, in which Albert Brooks, who in his previous job before he gave it all up was an ad exec, he attempts to sell the casino manager on what he called the boldest experiment in American advertising. And the casino manager, played wonderfully by a young-ish Gary Marshall, sits across from him and just completely...
I could see him being a casino manager.
And completely bemusement as he basically lets him get this off his chest with no ounce of actual acceptance. But Albert Brooks just pleads and says, what if you gave us our money back? And Gary Marshall is just, like, what? He's like, yeah, just think about it. People come to Vegas, right? They lose their money, whatever. But when people see your billboard that, hey, this one time you gave back this couple, they're going to want to stay here and gamble away. And he's like, well, we can't give away the money because then that would... And they go back and forth. And it's one of those things where it's like, it's 1% of a good idea because it's weirdly unique in the sense that, especially nowadays in the world of viral marketing and whatnot.
I was going to say, but Gary Marshall's basically... humoring a telemarketer at this
Absolutely,
point.
And he's getting some enjoyment out of it until about 3 minutes into the conversation where he's like, okay, I gotta go, but tell your wife good night. And the ensuing back and forth between them are two legends of television and film, Albert Brooks especially for me, his neurotic shtick, which never feels as whiny as somebody like Woody Allen, because he just truly does feel like a desperate man clinging to a lifeboat that's never going to come. And just there's one point he says a line that just always struck with me, where he's like, okay, and he's like, well, what if, he goes, we'd be the only people you give the money back to. You don't have to give, like, what, you mean like a gamblers? Yeah, because we're not gamblers. That's for other schmucks.
You bet.
And then Gary Marshall's like, schmucks? He's like, yeah, people who go see Wayne Newton. And then Gary Marshall goes, well, I like Wayne Newton. And then he goes, it was stupid to use an entertainer as a dividing point. Just that line right there, it just kind of capitalizes on the comedic timing of Albert Brooks and how he could really stage a scene. And it kind of is an artifact of how comedies used to be largely, which were kind of long and drawn out scene, not in a Judd Apatow way, but in where ideas could actually breathe and not just kind of punchline cut, where a character could actually dig themselves deeper into the hole. And we laugh not because the jokes are, I would say, like, outrageous, but because both people have such a tight grip on the comedic timing between the two of them that it's able to play out. And I think Lost in America, it's not even my favorite movie by Albert Brooks, though it's up there as one of the greats, but that scene is a wonderful little microcosm, and it's maybe my favorite thing that Gary Marshall has ever done.
This is really nerdy.
He is.
But what casino were they
Desert
at?
Inn.
Oh.
Yeah, and they reference that too, and they're like, because he's like, what? He's like asking Gary Marshall, and he's like, well, what do you think of when you think of a hunting lodge? He's like, a hunt. I mean, he's like, right. What do you think of when you think of a rest stop? He's like, rest. He goes, exactly. But no one thinks of the Desert Inn of anything. I mean, he's like, yeah, they do. They think gambling. And he's like, well, no. I mean other things. But yeah, it was the Desert Inn.
Good.
So, yeah.
That's an interesting time in Las Vegas.
Yeah, because that was the original Strip, right? Or no?
Well, yes, it's the Strip in the 80s. It still has the gangster stranglehold on it,
which Gary Marshall seems to subtly be playing.
Yeah,
but not overplaying, whereas you could actually buy him as just a legitimate.
There's a good chance he's not in on it,
right?
But the people pulling the strings are not corporations at that point.
Yeah.
It's just groups of people who have given the money to these places to also take the money, which just continues to lend into the ridiculousness of somebody attempting to get their money back when you fair and square, even if the game is rigged, lost. So,
yeah, so
that's pretty wonderful.
First of all, those people on those signs, they won. You lost.
But that's it. That's the campaign.
What's the campaign?
You gave my wife and I our money back because you reviewed our situation and you realized that we dropped out of society and we weren't just gamblers and we made a mistake and you gave our money back. Do you know you couldn't get a room in this place for 10 years?
Then everybody will want their money back. All the gamblers will say, hey, go to the Desert Inn and get our money back.
Not gamblers. You keep all the money. It's just that my wife and I aren't gamblers. That's what I'm saying. That's the distinction. My wife and I represent the few people, and I'll tell you something, there's probably nobody else that's ever going to come and have this happen. So really probably we're the only two. We represent the people who have taken the chance. And we made a mistake, and then the Desert Inn corrects it and gives it back. There is a warm feeling here.
But you don't think everybody then will want their money back?
No. In the campaign, you make a clear distinction between the bold, who would be my wife and I, and then all the other schmucks who come here to see Wayne Newton.
I like Wayne Newton.
I said Wayne Newton?
What were you talking about? I heard you say, schmuck, see Wayne Newton. I like him. That makes me a schmuck?
Oh, no. I'm stupid to use an entertainer as a dividing point. I just meant all the people that come here carefree on their way to see a show, and my wife and I, who, if you knew us, believe me, you would believe me.
You're bold.
Yes.
Yeah, so absolutely. So yeah, that was from the movie Lost in America from 1985, and that's going to be the last time I say this, but anybody and everybody should watch the first 5 or so. He only made 7, but if not all, but the first 5 or so films that Albert Brooks put out that he wrote and directed, because they are all comedic masterpieces.
Well, that is good to know. I've never seen any of them, so perhaps sometime we can get together and watch one.
We'll see.
Okay. So, my number 5, believe it or not, features Hugh Jackman again.
Oh my God.
As there's another performer who will be making 2 appearances on my list.
I have one performer that shows up twice, and that's all I have.
Okay.
But we'll find out who that is. Anyway.
Okay. But Hugh Jackman is on my list at number 5, and I absolutely love his conversation with James McAvoy in the airplane in X-Men Days of Future Past.
Oh.
Yes. So, the reason why this particular conversation is so great is because, the X-Men are supposed to be these great superheroes, but they also aren't always the smartest. Like, why are they letting Magneto go in an airplane? I guess I realize they have to get overseas and they want to take him with, so they're kind of vulnerable in that way. But at the same time, putting him in a metal airplane seems like a really bad idea. So... this particular conversation is fantastic because this is really the first time that they have been together since the beach incident, where
I kind of forgot about that, like chronological wise. Yeah,
and they're both getting some shit off their chest.
Oh yeah.
And the great part about this particular conversation, which very similar to the Prestige conversation, is not necessarily very long, but also is very impactful, in my opinion, is that you have the great alter egos of Charles, Xavier, and Magneto as they are meeting in a truly just raw state, as they are both trying to go save the woman that they love for different reasons, one of which views her as Raven, the other views her as Mystique. And it's just fascinating seeing the two of them talk about the events that transpired in the previous film, X-Men First Class. And when it finally just boils down to Magneto starting to completely blame Xavier for everything that happened, which is kind of fair. And you have James McAvoy jumping up to him and screaming about how he abandoned him and left him there on the beach to basically be paralyzed. And you just have Fassbender, as per usual, giving a fantastic performance, saying, well, you abandoned everybody, so fuck you, pretty much. And it's just like, yep.
Yeah.
So the back and forth between the two of them is great. The beginning of this conversation starts with attempting to play a game of chess, as per usual, between Xavier and Magneto, and turns into a very much car crash, as they usually do, as these people who are meant to be bitter rivals.
And yet they can't fly away because they're in a plane, which is kind
Well,
of
in the plane
interesting.
also, as Magneto is starting to get angry, starts to plummet towards the ground as it's crumbling, and
Isn't
basically
that the one where he like starts like naming off the names of the people who
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's very personal and also at the same time very emotional between the two of them. And what's great about it is an opposite of from the scene from The Prestige. This is... Did I say Hugh Jackman? He's not in this.
Yeah.
Damn.
I mean, he's there.
He's there. He's at the very end.
And I was
So
going to
that's
say,
why-
he
yeah.
punctuates the conversation with a good joke.
And that's what I was going to get to.
Ah.
So, anyways, that's why I was thinking of Hugh Jackman. My mistake on that. I'm so sorry. So, anyways, Fassbender is completely trashing James McAvoy at the end because he's fucking fantastic as Magneto, and actually in every one of those movies, he's basically a scene stealer.
I agree.
Throughout the entirety of the film whenever he's on screen, including the new one, which actually is pretty good. Everyone shitted on, but that was actually not that bad.
I agree.
I didn't go see it, so I don't have.
That's
an
okay. I mean, it's not like necessary, but at the same
Yeah.
time, for all the fucking mudslinging that happened for Dark Phoenix, it was actually pretty good.
Yeah, it was a standard X-Men movie, which I guess people hate, but don't pretend like this was somehow worse than the one you love. Basically.
Yeah.
But that's the weird thing, because this new X-Men series is kind of like the Hunger Games in that way, where everybody pretty much unanimously likes the second one, but they're all basically the same thing.
Oh, I thought you were saying this was like the Hunger Games because it has Jennifer Lawrence in it.
I mean, you could
Well,
make that
there's
leap.
a correlation there, I think.
But at the same time, I guess more what I was getting at is that, for the most part, at least critically, Days of Future Past is thought of as the one standout of the new X-Men series, when basically they're all the same shit. Yeah. But at the same time, this conversation is absolutely fantastic, ends with Magneto, for the most part, relenting and stepping back and just allowing Charles to sit there and stew in his destruction, as has just been laid down from Magneto, as he is definitely the more, I would say, angry and powerful, emotional-wise mutant. And then ends with the great Hugh Jackman line of telling Magneto, after he made all the dishes and everything fly throughout the airplane, they're all over the floor, why don't you pick that shit up? And that also is a fantastic moment of foreshadowing. It has nothing to do with the actual conversation that I was referencing, but it's a great moment of foreshadowing because he talks about Wolverine's...
Adamantium.
Yeah, but he doesn't have it yet.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, oh, well, you can't control me. He's like, just imagine if you were metal, which is fantastic. So it's good stuff. So anyways, that's a great scene. It's a fantastic conversation between the two characters in the middle of a film, but also peaking in terms of their characteristics being shown in one specific scene. So I absolutely love that.
Well, and also, too, they were peaking because they were at the highest point on Earth at that moment.
Highest point on Earth.
That they had been, because they were on an airplane.
Okay.
So, just...
I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
That was fantastic. And I'm, again, going to apologize because I said Hugh Jackman was involved in that conversation. He wasn't.
You know, it's okay.
He was periphery to it.
I didn't lie when I said that two of my participants show up in, or one of my participants shows up in two different episodes, or... You know what? Forget it.
Okay. You were right that the first round went really good, and now we're circling the drain here.
Yeah, that's why I want to go first.
Thank you.
I mean, we
Toussaint.
randomized.
That was good.
Yeah.
That was good. You know what? That was good shade thrown, and it was great.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Speaking of Toussaint, it's hers turn. It's his turn to fuck up.
Lord.
So good luck.
Good luck. Okay, so my number 5 is from an animated film. It is from a Japanese animated film. And I know, like, going off of what Nick said before about, like, using foreign films, I wish I had thought about that before. But
I was
like,
just to stop myself.
Right, yeah. But I think that at least this is from one of my favorite animated films, and I think that this line reading, even if it's, like, the English dub, like, is one of the most memorable ways of sort of, like, encapsulating what is sort of, like, the main through line theme of like this film for me is like, and spoiler, there is another animated film on this as well too, but this is the first one. So for number 5, this is from the 1989 animated film Akira, and is basically a conversation between the main character, one of the main characters, Shotaro Kaneda, and Kikyo. And basically, Kikyo is this this esper, right? This sort of like psychic, right? And basically, at the point in this this film, a lot of events have happened. The other protagonist, who is ostensibly the antagonist of the film, Tetsuo, has basically gone off on his own, is going on a rampage across the city. Kaneda and his friend Kei have basically broken out of prison with the help of Kikyo, by the way. They don't know that yet. But they ended up going back to an old bar that they all used to hang out with, like before, like all the shit hit the fan. And then Kaneda finds out that Tetsuo, during one of his rages, actually killed one of their mutual friends, Yamagata. And basically saying, like, I don't know what happened to him, but he just started acting like a different person. And then basically what Kaneda does is give Yamagata's bike a Viking funeral and just like crashes it into a wall in order to send Yamagata his bike, because they were bikers, right? And then he turns around and he sees Kei, who is being possessed by Kikyo, walking on water, and then he tries to like run after her, and he ends up sloshing in the water, and then she ends up like phasing out of existence and stuff, like being teleported someplace. And then Kikyo basically gives him the whole spiel about, like the thing about Akira's power is that it exists within everyone from the start, and that when that power is awakened, it is very important how one chooses to use it, and that Tetsuo has already made his choice. And she and the other espers are partly to blame for why Tetsuo has gone insane at this point. And so then kind of to ask, like, well, why are you using Kei then? I was like, well, because she has an aptitude for it. Like, she is like psychically sensitive, so we're basically going to use her to help get rid of Tetsuo at this point, basically possessing her, fighting Tetsuo, and killing Tetsuo. And basically the line that sort of encapsulates that conversation for me is, like, they're people, not toys. Like, bring them back to me. And Tetsuo is our friend, not yours. If anybody's going to kill him, it should be us. And that, to me, is like the encapsulation of, there are so many large-scale events that are happening in this film, but really at its crux is the relationship between Tetsuo and Kaneda, and how Tetsuo has sort of harbored both this admiration and this animosity towards Kaneda for the fact that he's always been a big brother character to him, but because he has always existed as sort of this fixture that is always punching down on him, like he's always the head of the pack, Tetsuo resents him for the fact that his presence, by so many different degrees, that he believes inhibits him from being able to grow into his own person. And so now that he actually has these powers, this person who has never had power before happens upon these colossal powers, which is like the equivalent of an amoeba giving like the potential of a human being. And he's basically just lashing out at everyone who is ever, like, he's ever harbored resentment for, or who's ever, like, given him shit for. And whether or not if that is in reality or if it's only in his own mind, right? And so really the crux of that film to me is that it is the story of watching your best friend turn into a monster and having to ask the question of whether or not you had a part in either consciously or unconsciously in pushing this person into becoming a monster. And so what responsibility then do you have to sort of reconciling that? And that's such a that line for me, like, it's just such a, it flew by me so many times when I watched the film originally, but just it wasn't until like at least like when I was in college and like going back and like watching it that really sort of like stuck out for me. And now that's like one of my favorite like conversations in like any anime I've ever seen. So yeah, that's number 5.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well described.
Thank you.
You've got your shit together for this episode.
Yep.
And no one else does.
That's okay.
So that's good.
Nick.
It's fine. So moving on to number 4. Nicholas, let us know what you've got.
Well, I will.
Okay.
I may have said no Magnolia, but I didn't say no PT. Hey!
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 Hey! Hey!
So, my number 4 is the...
Anima.
What did you say?
You said enema, I'm pretty
yeah,
sure.
Did you say
Tom York's Anima.
No.
The 15-minute short film created
First of
by
all,
Paul Thomas
enunciate
Anderson.
it so we know you're saying anima and not enema.
I'm sorry.
I heard enema.
It's
because that's two different things.
Well, they're literally like off by like 2 letters. So.
Well,
pretty much.
The procedure is a little different between the two.
I know, like, yeah.
One is watching a music vid, and the other one is getting probed. And
Aren't they
drained.
similar though?
Well,
is it a probe?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a probe, drain, flush.
I can't believe we're talking about this. Please,
this is your fault.
I've seen it in a porno.
Please talk about your.
It's actually a really common trend in pornos. No, like I'm not doing a bit. It is. It's in
to actually be on screen.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's in Alex Dorenzi's Pretty Peaches, and I want to say
Peaches.
It's a trilogy. There's Pretty Peaches 2, and Pretty Peaches 3.
See, if this was Disney, it would have been Pretty Peaches, then like something like Pretty Apples.
Aww.
See, they would have changed the fruit.
But yeah, no, I've seen
Pretty
Venema.
Peaches: The Return of Jafar.
Aww.
Ooh.
Yeah, they wouldn't get Jafar with that one. All right.
What is he doing with his staff?
Lord.
Don't know.
Is that supposed to be a Yagoo?
Kind of.
Okay.
My number 4 is the opening scene to Inherent Vice, where Shasta Fay wanders back into Doc Sportello's life for the first time in a long while since they have unceremoniously broke up. And it is a fantastic scene acted out by two heavy hitters, in my opinion, of Joaquin Phoenix and Catherine Waterston, especially because
is this
at the
scene
time...
where Catherine Waterston is naked or not?
No, that's the reconciliation.
Okay.
Way later on in the movie.
It's been a while, sorry.
No, they literally, that's the power of this scene, but they meet in this scene, in the opening scene, and they don't see each other for at least 2 hours in the running time of the movie, and that's when that comes back into play. But no, this one is her outlining kind of the exposition to Doc of what her situation is and who and what she's entangled with, and yet it's also so very temporary in the sense that she can't even stay with him because it's so dangerous and so far-reaching, this conspiracy and whatnot. So it's this kind of meet-cute moment between the two where they don't even have time to truly reconnect, and it's both productive because of that, because they are not able to rehash a lot of drama, and yet also kind of sad because of that, because she's going to him as a private dick and not as an ex-lover, and yet
although she kind of
no
is.
I mean that's at first glance.
Okay, I got you.
I mean, obviously
yep.
there are other things at play and whatnot, but then the tensions of that conflict boil over into the scene, and it's just home to so many great line readings between the two of them. Whether it's just the literal opening where she said, or where he says, "Is that you, Shasta?" and she says, taken straight from Pynchon's writing, thinks he's hallucinating. And it's just this kind of elegant prose that's both meant to kind of represent the stoner ennui of the whole thing, and yet also just the kind of, I don't know, I would say pretentious show-off-ness of the writing in general, and I absolutely eat it up. And you also kind of get a little decoder ring of a dialogue for the film as a whole, because at one point she says, "It's not what you're thinking, Doc," and he goes, "That's okay, thinking comes later," and that's kind of the mantra of the film itself, and it's still technically it's another one of those on my list that's like a 10-minute scene all in all, because there's a lot that gets covered, and it's also one shot once they leave from the house onto the street as they're still conversing, as she gets into her car, as she drives off, and then he walks away, and that's all. So we have so much in this scene, whether it's the performances between the two, the very frail and fraught dialogue between the two that they're spouting at each other, and also the cinematography paired with the actual shot on celluloid grain. It's just some of the most beautifully caught luminescent night shots I've ever seen in a movie. This opening scene is my version of ASMR, where I can put this scene on and be put to sleep, not because I'm bored or whatever, but because this is my happy place of cinema as a whole that is soothing to me.
Do you know, because I am thinking back to that scene now and thinking about a Lubezki trait of, because you're talking about the lighting in it, did they use this? It's not natural light, but the only lighting in the scene, because I know the scene you're speaking of.
They didn't use it. They made it look like it. So yes,
it's a Like, it's a weird thing because that scene feels poorly lit.
Yes, because he has no lights on in his house.
Right.
But yet there is some moonlight coming in somehow
Right.
because he lives by the sea.
Which is what I'm getting at.
Yes,
that it
by the
feels
beach.
poorly lit, but not in a bad way.
No, and that's the thing is, like, the faces come through in it. And then even when he goes to get a beer out of the fridge, and the way that just interrupts the almost noir-tinged opening of it all. And that's what I love, is that it's not beholden to a particular throwback look. It's not like he wanted to shoot it to look like a movie from that era, even though it ends up kind of being Altman-esque in its kind of detached form. But I just know, it's one of the most gorgeous lit scenes ever, and the lights, whether it comes from the moon or from the harsh glow of the fridge or some of the outside activities, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And of course, Catherine Waterston is also lit wonderfully as she stands on the threshold in a much different way than he is. And there's just so much going on there that I can watch that scene over and over and over and never get bored.
It's a fantastic scene because, to go with the theme of that film, you assume as a viewer, especially if you do not know the story prior, that Catherine Waterston is going to be a major player in the film.
No, and yet she's like, her character is uttered in almost every scene because she's obviously integral to Doc and to the plot. But no, once she leaves there, and that's what also makes like almost the fatality of that scene. And I don't mean that in that literal death sense, but just in the, this is the last time we might have a conversation. It just makes it even more potent because there was a very real chance that she would not have appeared for the rest of the movie, and it certainly holds off to the right moment to actually let her reappear, and it just makes their kind of last conversation just all the more somber for it. Or I should say their first conversation before.
Okay. Yep.
But yeah, I just think it's an absolutely gorgeous scene, and I very much love it.
So, I did some soul searching.
Okay.
On...
Good.
Probably my favorite director of all time, which is Martin Scorsese.
Okay.
And
you realize he's canceled?
No.
Good.
So,
because he's not.
Correct. Still kicking it, even though he did a lot of cocaine back in the good old days. But I will say, even though I feel like it feels like a calling card, conversations aren't necessarily what he does best, I think, in his films. I think a lot of his best work is done with showing the audience. Even though he has a lot of spoken word throughout his films.
Yeah, and very iconic ones.
Absolutely. I don't necessarily know if actual one-on-one or even group conversations are what gets the job done for Scorsese. That being said, Goodfellas and Casino both have some really fantastic conversations in it, albeit not as impactful as other films in terms of delivering on one-on-one or even group dialogue. That being said, to go kind of the opposite direction from you with Magnolia, I felt, thinking back on all of the great conversations that happened in the movie Casino, which is my favorite movie of all time, I felt obliged to include one on my list because I think there are plenty to choose from. And the one that I ended up selecting that I thought was actually the most important, even if it's not the most iconic between these two characters, is the conversation between Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro that takes place in Robert De Niro's house kind of halfway through the film, which I feel like, to go with a theme of a very important melding between characters, as I talked about in my last conversation, the X-Men one, this is when things start to go to shit. And really, De Niro's character of Sam Rothstein is on top of the world before everything starts to crumble down on him. And it's mostly happening because of his best friend, Nicky Santoro, who is on the way up, while Sam Rothstein is now somewhat on the way down, but they're supposed to be on the same team. So they're having a weird meeting happening at his house, where they actually had to use all these weird signals to actually have this meeting take place, because the feds and the local police are completely onto them at this point. But again, they are both doing very well at this moment halfway through the film, and yet they have this meeting at Sam Rothstein's house, and basically they just start calling each other out on their shit. And when you've got two gangsters who are playing different kind of gangster roles, starting to turn on each other, you know it's going to go bad really quickly. Mm-hmm. And this is just the start of it, because it's such a weird conversation, because both are trying to show respect for each other while shitting on them at the same time. So you have all these weird discussion points happening throughout, and it eventually just turns into a full-on just mud tossing between the two of them. At one point, Joe Pesci brings up how shitty of a husband Robert De Niro is, and
true.
He starts to talk about he like starts to like kind of like make it seem like Robert De Niro's starting to act like he's gay, talking about him wearing a pink robe and having a cigarette holder. It gets very bizarre really quickly.
That's
and it's great because the
such
scene...
a granular detail to like pick at somebody for.
Well, I think, and really quickly, between the two of them, I think what's fascinating about their arcs in that movie, and I would say the convergence points of that scene, is that Rothstein is, or I should say, Joe Pesci's character is mad at Robert De Niro's character because
he thinks he's getting soft.
Yeah, and he's changing because of it. And Robert De Niro's character is mad at Joe Pesci's character because he's not changing and dialing it down because of the location that we're in.
Well, and not only is he not changing, he's going so far the other way that he's making trouble for him.
Which would have probably worked anywhere else but Vegas, but not anywhere else, but in general. Like,
the problem is that, and why it worked out so well for everybody previous to this, it was all under the radar. Like, it was not people's perception that gangsters were running the show and murdering people behind the scenes and taking out the garbage and whatever. They thought they were going to Las Vegas to bet on things, see shows, have a good time, drink, whatever. And yet they're fucking it up on their own. And both of them think the other party is the one that is doing it. And more than anything, the dialogue and the actual intent for the two characters is fantastic. But De Niro and Joe Pesci at close to the height. I mean, it's definitely the height of Joe Pesci's career, in my opinion. Even though he won an Oscar for Goodfellas, his performance in Casino is so fucking over the top that it is just perfect, in my opinion, for the kind of character actor that Joe Pesci was throughout his career. I mean, he made a living off of playing these ridiculous, whiny, like, talented Gilbert Godfrey characters throughout his career. And yet, De Niro, this was kind of towards the end of his high point. I mean, it was right before Meet the Parents came out, which was the beginning of the end. And
one of history's darkest hours.
Meet the Parents isn't that bad, but
actually,
it was,
that was like a success and for good reason. But
it
became a thing of he can do this.
Yeah, this is the turn. Yeah,
he can be funny.
That's how we get little Fockers.
Oh God! So that scene is great. A really easy scene to pick out between the two of them is the scene in the desert that takes place later, which is a great scene, but there's not really much happening there other than a bunch of shouting at each other. So both are great, but this particular scene is absolutely fantastic just because it is truly the moment where we have reached the top of the mountain and now we can't stay here forever, so we've got to go fucking down. And they start to go down, and it, if you haven't seen the film, it keeps going bad.
You know, I don't know what it is, Sammy, but the more I talk to you, the more I feel like you just don't want to go along with me. Is that it?
No, I
You
don't
should
want
say
to come.
so.
I don't want to come along with you.
Just
I'll be
say-
honest
all
with
right,
you.
fine.
I don't want to be involved in anything you're
Fine.
talking about, okay? I just want to run a square joint. That's it. I just want my license. I want everything nice and quiet. That's it.
Be quiet like this. I'm the boss. That's quiet.
That's all taken out of context.
Yeah,
I
that's
have no
out of
control
context.
over that.
No, no.
Ronnie and Billy were right there to tell you
Well,
exactly
back
what
home, they
happened.
don't know about fucking control. That looks bad.
Looks bad? I'm going to
Yeah.
tell you what looks bad. Every time you're on television, I get mentioned. That That looks bad. That looks
What
bad.
the fuck happened to you? Will you tell me?
What happened to me? What happened to you? You lost your control.
I lost control.
Yes, you
Look
lost
at
your
you.
control.
You're fucking walking around like John Barrymore. A fucking pink robe and a fucking a cigarette holder. I lost control. You know, I don't want to bring this up, but you've been treating a lot of people with a lot of disrespect, even your own wife.
My wife?
Yeah.
Now, what does she have to do with all
Well,
this?
she came to see me. She was upset about a lot of things, especially that whole fucking that Lester Diamond incident.
All of a sudden, you're the shoulder to cry on? Did you at least tell her about your little role in that whole situation?
No, I didn't. Well, go with that, dude. That's not the fucking
Listen,
point.
I would've-
The point is that she's upset. You got a fucking problem.
I would appreciate it if you stay out of my personal life, okay? You wouldn't like it if I did it to
Hey,
you.
she came to
Please,
talk
don't
to me.
do it to me.
She came to talk
okay?
to me, and what was I supposed to do? Throw her out?
Just stay away from her. It's none of your business, okay? There are certain things you don't
It's
do.
none of
you
my
know
business.
that.
A week ago it was my business. Now it's none of my business. In other words, when you need me to take care of something for you, then you need me.
Yeah, that's right. The way you need me to vouch for you as a citizen and get you out of one of your jams. I'm going to have to straighten out what you just did with this guy. This guy is going to run to the FBI,
Your
Nick.
fucking head is getting bigger than your casino. That's your problem, pal.
So, yep. Fabulous film, great conversation, and oh God, I'm so scared for The Irishman.
Oh man, yeah.
I'm so afraid.
Yeah.
They haven't shown any footage yet, and that's not good.
Those behind the scenes pictures are quite hilarious. I mean, I can't judge a film by just like like a
especially considering how much work they're gonna have to do in post anyway.
Yeah,
but will that post matter?
The first
their platform shoes are just hilarious to me.
The first, it wasn't a preview. It was. You remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the trailer where they just have past quotes.
Yes.
Yeah, the voiceover where it's like, yes, I do this. Yes.
It feels like, and we were talking about this before we started the episode, but it feels like The Lion King where they're not showing you much because it's going to be bad.
Yeah, they're working on that up until the hour. Up until the hour before it goes up. Like, holy shit.
But anyways, if you want a fantastic Scorsese film, Casino is there, and it has many great conversations, including that one.
Yeah.
Moving on to Toussaint with his number 4.
Okay, so my number 4 is the second and last animated film on my list. It is from the 1995 animated film Ghost in the Shell, directed by Mamoru Oshii. And it is basically the final conversation between Major Motoko Kusanagi and the Puppet Master. And I know that this is... I'm flexing this as a conversation between two people because it turns out there is there is another person who's an onlooker, who's basically Bato, that is hooking up the remains of Kusanagi's body to like the body that actually houses the Puppet Master, so that she can actually like talk to this person who like throughout this entire movie has been just like a cat and mouse game of the Puppet Master supposedly committing these criminal acts, but really all it's been has just been a ploy to sort of elicit the response of Section 9, in particular her, so that eventually they could meet at this one point. And why exactly did this being and this entity want to meet Kusanagi for the first time? And Nick, you and I, we actually like watched the film a couple
you showed it to me finally 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, before the remake came out, and it's probably like one of the most memorable conversations that I've watched in an anime film alongside with the Akira one, but this one probably like it had me reeling because I was trying to like really like wrap my brain around like what the Puppet Master actually wanted and what this actually meant in sort of like a grander context. And it sort of like sums up the themes of the film of like the duality of like humanity and technology and how they advance with one another and what is necessary in order to like move past a point of like mutual limitations into becoming something that is greater than either one of them is possible of entertaining. And really just like, what does that look like? And it's like, we have no idea. And I guess that was like my first preliminary introduction to the idea of the singularity before the singularity was even in vogue. And yeah, that's always gonna stick out to me. Like the imagery of that, how that conversation ends, how it's punctuated, and what transpires between the two, and like what they share in that conversation, still really resonates with me to this day. Like I've had conversations with colleagues, right? Like a little aside for this, right, where a colleague of mine watched Ghost in the Shell, the original, shortly before the original film came out, right? And he was totally shitting on it. Just did not like that film at all, right? And that's totally fine. It's like I'm the kind of person where I can enjoy something, but I do believe that there is a value in listening to a smart person talking about what they may not have liked about one of my favorite things, simply for the fact that then it allows me to sort of look past whatever glossy veneer I might have towards it and really being able to wrestle with what particularly do I like about that film. It's not that it somehow disabuses me of my enjoyment, but rather forces me to sort of fine hone what it is about that film.
It's hard to be fair against things that you really, really like.
Yeah, I know. It was like, exactly.
I'm hearing what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. So like, I think that it's valuable to have those sort of conversations. It's when those conversations move outside of being a critique of the work, but rather the people who consume said work. That conversation absolutely has no. It yields absolutely no benefit to either person. It's just
Toussaint's just shitting over the people who like the Scarlett Johansson.
I'm not even doing that. It's like no. It's like I know. I'm sure that there are people who enjoy that film, and I don't mean anything against people for that.
There's not many.
I know. I know. I literally walked past my bookcase earlier today and saw the art book that I bought for that film simply so that I could write about that film when I needed to. I have not cracked it open since. I have no compulsion to crack it open, let alone to watch that film again. Because if anything, watching that film and then coming back to the 1995 film, there were subtleties and nuances that I did not pick up in the original that are just totally lost in the remake, even though they are basically recreating the exact same scene. But just these crucial differences are what elevate so many of those relationships and so many of those moments. It's like the cinematic, like the remake is like the cinematic equivalent of silly putty, where you put it on a newspaper and you get like a vague impression, but it's not the actual thing, and you can only maybe see half of like the actual like ink and the actual context itself. Is like, oh, this is the vague impression of these ideas, but not really the actual like subtext or the context of like what actually makes them interesting. So yeah, but sorry to get off on a tangent like that. Like, but that conversation though is another one of those moments that is left that is an enduring part of why I love that film, why I love the Ghost in the Shell like franchise as a whole, and one of those things that was just tragically just mutilated on the cutting room floor with regards to the Rupert Sanders production. So yeah.
Okay, halfway through.
Yay, we did it.
I was going to say, feel like we're having a good time, and definitely been some good examples so far.
Keep it going.
Absolutely. Moving to number 3.
My number 3 is, I believe, let's just see here. Yep, it is the only ending I have on my list.
Okay.
And it is essentially, I mean, there's a few passing scenes of nothing, basically, just in the grand scheme of things, but this is the final confrontation and conversation between two important characters in Lars von Trier's Dogville. For those who have never seen it, I'll kind of give a very brief glimpse into it and what is happening in the culmination of the movie, but essentially Dogville centers around a woman named Grace, played by Nicole Kidman, who happens to take shelter and refuge upon this nice little American town. And it's a very small town, and it only inhabits maybe a dozen people or so. And also, you should keep in mind, in case you ever want to watch Dogville, which you should because it's a masterpiece, that the movie is shot as a faux play, basically. It's shot on a soundstage where there is no set, and it's a chalk outline of like where the rooms are at the and so you're always cognitive of the fact that these are actors just performing lines, but they are performing the hell out of them and whatnot. A formal experiment, to be sure, but one that completely works because of Von Trier's master hand.
Master hand.
So
I like that you had like a snidely whiplash moment. They're like, as he's over tying the fucking woman to the train tracks.
Yeah.
So as
you would
Grace,
never do something so. So pedestrian.
Yeah. It's not that basic.
Yeah.
So as Grace finds this town, at first her effect on the town is positive, but like in any Von Trier film, he starts to investigate whether that's just a facade for deeper and more unsettling human truths that are always at bay and usually wanting to come out. And so her time at Dogville then takes a turn for the worse, not through fault of her, but because of her. And the town resorts to their baser impulses, and it's just a nightmare for her by the end. So at the very last, shall we say, chapter, because it's actually told in chapters, you found out in the beginning of the movie that she was running away from her father, who was a gangster, because it takes place circa 1915, I think it's during the Depression or so.
Okay.
And that's who she was running away from. So at the very end of the film, her father comes to collect her when he finds where she's been hiding and whatnot. And the father is played by James Caan. So here, that's my repeat performer. And the two of them have a conversation about the town of Dogville in their car as they decide what to do with the denizens of this once idyllic small town in the harshest of climates and conditions. So the two of them talk both at each other, and but yet kind of about philosophical ways of the world, and it essentially comes down to a conversation about the nature of arrogance and how she doesn't want to go home with him, even though she could have anything she wanted, and she could, because he'll let her back, basically, is what he's pleading with her, and she could have the power by extension through him of what that comes with. And they can not only leave Dogville behind, but they could just get rid of it, because why save a town and let it exist who would do the things that Dogville and its citizens end up doing to her? And so she calls him arrogant, and it starts this kind of chain reaction of this father-daughter conversation, which both simultaneously sounds like an actual child-father argument, as, both sides, have points, but also becomes an actual dialogue about humanity's worth as a whole, because he then throws it back at her and says, you, in letting them live and letting them do these things to you, are arrogant to think that that is somehow a better thing to do, because the idea that you would not permit yourself to do the things that you're letting them do means that you're finding yourself superior to them. And isn't that the most arrogant thing of all? And of course she takes umbrage to that, because while that's a didactic way of looking at it, it doesn't leave room for mercy. And then he says there's time for mercy, and they go back and forth, and it's just one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever seen, and which what's great is that it takes place in that car, so the people who are really going to be at the end of this conversation, as far as the receiving end, are in no way included in this dialogue, nor should they really have a say because of their actions as performed in the movie but by that point. But it's also just feels like Von Trier himself playing God with his own characters and wrestling in his mind whether they deserve to suffer or not, and whether they bring it upon themselves. And it's just a fantastic scene between the two of them, and it's Nicole Kidman, James Caan, two very fantastic actors, and I absolutely love it.
And you can't really say for certain which. When you're saying that I haven't seen this film, and I really do want to watch this film with you, because I've heard rave things about it, both from you and from other people that I respect with regards to like Von Trier's work. I've only seen like a couple of his stuff, right?
Yeah.
But what sounds like when you're talking about Von Trier basically playing God with his characters, I know there is the tendency to sort of look to literal analogs, one-to-one analogs between a work and their creator with regards to the viewpoints that are sort of voiced in that sort of regard. I don't mean to go off on a tangent with this, because it's something that's been swimming in my brain lately with regards to a lot of criticism with regards to works that is like, it's like these works are being so political, and it's like, and it really comes down to like people not understanding the difference between politics and ideology as they reflect lived experiences and beliefs of the human experience that we all sort of share, and partisanship, which speaks to a far more literal and far more like entrenched, like sort of a body between like two like ideologies clashing and stuff like that. It boggles my mind that we're swimming in this sea of terminology that no one can really come to a consensus about, either through like bad faith arguing or from just honestly a deficient liberal arts education all across. I was like, I don't need to learn no fucking literature and shit. I'm just like, maybe you should learn something about ethics. But anyway, like sort of circling this back is like, when you say that it's Von Trier like playing God with his characters, it's easy to sort of like read into that as like, oh yeah, it's like, well, one of these is supposed to be the devil on Von Trier's shoulder, and the other is supposed to be the angel on Von Trier's shoulder. I was like, no, I don't think it's like that. It's like, I think it's really just sort of like teasing out a thought experiment, and it just happens to be an idea that exists in your mind at that time, and you're just like watching it play out like a tennis game between these two like opponents. And seeing like where their mutual strengths and weaknesses sort of like balance out with one another. And really, it's not about whether one of them wins out or not. It's really just about like trying to tease out the meaning in between that struggle. That's at least my read of like what you're talking about that. And it's like, yeah, that's
well. And I think the ending of Dogville, to kind of loop it back around too. But I'll say this: if the house that Jack built was a great indication, in my opinion, of Lars von Trier's playful side, showing
Jesus
how he
Christ.
doesn't take his characters as seriously as people accuse him of. I think Dogville is a great example of the opposite, which is that he takes his characters so seriously that to call him a provocateur is to slight what he's actually doing behind the scenes, which is that he almost takes great pains to even wrestle through what resolution he comes up with his characters and what morally it says about them.
And his intentions and sentiments can like vacillate between the two. Like he strikes me as a guy who is very nihilistic and also but
he doesn't deny the
nobody
existence.
hates him as much as he hates himself, and he also hates his audience, and he just knows how to take the piss out of both himself and other people.
Going off of what Nick was saying, though, I think it's pretty easy and clear that he's doing both. Like, I mean, the idea of him being a provocateur and just for the most part clearly embracing that, while at the same time not. I mean, I think you can do both.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is that to label him as one thing is to, for example, look at that scene in Dogville where you see two people on different sides of the car arguing their philosophies and thinking that he is only one of them, you know. And
So what is it? What is it? The thing that you don't like about me?
It was a word you used that provoked me. You called me arrogant.
To plunder, as it were, a God-given right, I'd call that arrogant, Daddy.
But that is exactly what I don't like about you. It's you that is arrogant.
That's what you came here to say? I'm not the one passing judgment, Daddy. You are.
No. You do not pass judgment because you sympathize with a deprived...
And that's what I love about that scene in Dogville. And that movie in general, because frankly, I could have chosen a lot of scenes from that movie, because it's a pretty much dialogue-driven movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is one that, as Tucson was mentioning, we definitely need to all get together and watch sometime.
Woohoo! When we got 3 hours to spare.
We'll figure it out. That's like the new film from the guy who did Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah, Dragged Across Concrete.
Yeah.
Great movie.
Lengthy, I've heard.
Lengthy, yes. And feels like it.
Oh, boy.
In a good way, in my opinion.
Feels like being dragged across concrete.
Tucson's going to freak out when he sees that movie, if he sees that movie, because there's whiteface in that movie.
What the fuck?
Yep. And I'm not, like, exaggerating. Like, no, but that's a thing. And it's in that movie.
Sure.
Which is kind of made me laugh because of how much Craig S. Sauer is getting shit for being so, quote-unquote, conservatively rigid in his presentation of his characters and ideologies, which you already addressed as far as, like, how people get so caught up on the characters as mouthpiece for the artist. It's kind of crazy, and I agree with that to Von Trier and Craig S. Sauer. But for him to include two black characters doing whiteface for a purpose, I just thought,
Just
you know
for
what?
shits and giggles.
Whether I disagree or agree with Craig S. Sauer's politics, I gotta hand it to the man. He knows how to get the audience walking out. So continue.
Okay, so I said before we started recording that I included a Tarantino film on mine, and I did, and it is my second closing scene of a film, and it is the final scene, and this is the closest I had to a monologue, as you were saying earlier, Nick, as it was tough to toil over, but this is definitely a conversation, but it is more of one person talking to another person, and that is the final scene in the diner in Pulp Fiction, as there's the conversation between Samuel L. Jackson and Tim Roth. So Tim Roth, as a absolutely fantastic loop around, is in the opening scene of Pulp Fiction, as he is about to
stick up the place.
Yes, he's about to rob a diner. He's having a conversation with, I'm blanking on
a lot of diners.
His girlfriend.
Yeah, his girlfriend.
Bunny.
Yes, he's playing a character. His name is Pumpkin, and her name is Bunny.
And you don't actually know. Sorry to cut you off.
No, man.
But what's interesting is that you see that scene for the first time at the beginning of the film that opens it, and then it just. I believe that it then smash cuts to the title card, which is Pulp Fiction, and then like there's other scenes that are sprinkled about, like in. Non-sequential order, and then it ropes back and you realize like, oh wait, they're all at the same diner, that's what's going on, and you actually like it's like a it's not a brick joke, right? It's like a
it's just a non-linear movie with variable vantage points.
That's a good tie-in.
What is it called when you make note of something at the very beginning? And it's just such a innocuous little detail, and then it ends up panning out and like.
That's a brick joke only if the resolution of it is actually still innocuous. So like it can't have a grand effect on the plot, which that obviously does because they're in the same diner. That changes their entire plans to rob the place.
Yeah.
So that would be something like you're introduced it in an early scene, and then it shows up in the most random of ways, but also still. Fails to really, at least that's what I've always thought of as a brick joke.
Okay, yeah.
But anyway.
So what is fantastic about the actual finale of this film and the final conversation between Samuel L. Jackson and Tim Roth, as you have Tim Roth setting the tone for the film at the very beginning, as he and his girlfriend are having a really random conversation, making a bunch of racist remarks, and then deciding to stick up a diner. And then at the very end of the film, you realize that Samuel L. Jackson's and John Travolta's characters are in that same diner. Obviously, we've seen their characters progress through an entire morning, and a lot of shit has happened for the two of them, and a lot of shit will continue to happen, specifically to John Travolta, who ultimately meets his demise later on in the story, although he still is involved in this part because it's earlier, whatever, it's fine. Anyways, so you have the stick-up, which is being held by Tim Roth, and he basically attempts to steal the briefcase that John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson are after throughout the film. And Samuel L. Jackson's not down with that. So he basically ends up then sticking him up and having a gun pointed at him. He ends up having to sit down in the booth and basically is forced into listening to Jules
talk about what actually brought him to the point where he's going to have a stick up, but he's not aiming to really kill anybody in the situation. He's trying to diffuse it.
So what's fascinating about this conversation, though, is that you have a small-time crook and a career criminal on opposite ends of the spectrum, especially because Tim Roth gives the impression of someone who is going into this lifestyle and wanting to become a career criminal. And Jules, who has reached the point where he's already
gone through his career.
He's literally trying to leave.
Right.
He no longer wants to participate.
Right.
And he has just had a could be thought of as a
divine intervention.
I was going to say thought of as complete luck, or as he is seeing a divine intervention. But the fascinating part about this final conversation is the fact that he attempts to then provide enlightenment to Tim Roth's character, which is fascinating because it's a film that, although there are definitely moments throughout that, it's pretty incredible to me that was decided to be the final scene of the film. It's fantastic, and I chose it to be one of the best conversations because it is a fantastic scene.
It's one of the best scenes that Quentin Tarantino has ever written.
I would agree. But at the same time, if you see every other event that happens throughout that film, if you were just a film viewer, you would not think that they would end up in the diner at the final scene. You would think, realistically, it would end up at the final scene with Bruce Willis riding off into the sunset on his motorcycle or something like that.
Yeah.
But this conversation where Samuel L. Jackson's character of Jules is really just getting down to it and describing that here's this dialogue Bible verse that
he keeps on repeating all the time.
And basically he's made up.
Yeah.
It's not real.
Right.
And he describes that he just said that to his prey, much like Jack Nicholson's Joker said his line to the people he was going to kill.
I just thought it'd be some stone cold cool shit to say before you cap somebody, but then I actually started thinking about it more.
Yes.
Yeah.
And has the fantastic walk-off line from Samuel Jackson where he talks about how he views himself and he believes he's one thing, but he's really trying to be the shepherd. Like he wants to be not necessarily good, but he wants to be something opposite from what he is.
He's like, it's like, maybe like I'm the shepherd and you're the flock and it's the world that's all fucked up, but that's actually not true. It's like what's true is that you are the weak and I am the tyranny of evil men, but I'm trying very hard
to be the
I'm
shepherd.
trying real hard to be the shepherd.
But then thanks for making me look even better, because I mean the reality is that I didn't come with that in depth of it because I was not prepared for this episode, obviously. But
I haven't seen that film or seen that scene in ages.
And yet you still remembered.
I still remember that line, and it's like it still sticks with me.
And what is great about that particular conversation is that you see Tim Roth's, it's not necessarily his words that are, but it's the
sentiment, the gravity.
I was going to say, the looks he gives off of his face as he is actually pondering what Samuel L. Jackson's character is saying, and then he leaves with his girlfriend and he takes the money, obviously not the suitcase, because even though Samuel L. Jackson's winding out, he's still got to deliver his fucking job. It is a great walk-off scene in a film that is absolutely fantastic, and just a wonderful moment to end on, and a great conversation between two characters who are on opposite sides of the spectrum at that point, when if you would have had the same conversation the day before, it could have been totally different.
Oh, yeah.
So,
totally different person.
So, yeah, that was wonderful. I will say, this is really random, but I definitely want to bring up another conversation that I thought of, and I was surprised that I thought of this one and liked it as much as I did, but I think it is super impactful, and it is wonderful, and is actually a conversation from the movie The Florida Project.
Yeah.
I still haven't seen that.
It's a really good film.
Great movie.
And Willem Dafoe, who plays a wonderful character who is definitely a conflicted slumlord throughout, who is making money off of these poor people having to live in his hotels as a slum, but at the same time genuinely does feel for these people.
And protecting them and standing up for them. So it's, yeah, for sure.
At one point, the film takes a turn and has him basically having to fend off a child predator. And it's on the happiest place on Earth,
Lord.
And there is a man out there trying to get some of the children to come with him.
Right.
And basically, Willem Dafoe goes out and starts playing along with him for a good 5 minutes of him just being like, well, you know, it's really warm out. Why were you here? I want to get a soda. Well, let's go get you a soda. That sounds great.
Let's get you a soda, buddy.
And then he gets him the soda, gets him his chains back, and then slaps that shit out of his hand. He's like, get your fucking ass out of here.
Yeah.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
It's great. Willem Dafoe is fantastic.
He is.
Over time, he is just notches on his belt over and over again.
Yeah.
And now looking back on it, he's just got a fantastic work of in his career. So,
yeah.
But that particular scene and conversation between him and the creepy ass vacationeer who is trying to find poor children to prey on, is pretty great. So, yep. Sorry, that was kind of out of left field.
No,
but
that's a good conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm now even more interested in seeing the Flora Project because I've heard like sort of like broad, enthusiastic praise for it, enthusive praise for it, but like I would like to watch it now. Yeah.
It has a very interesting ending. I will say that leaves definitely some to the viewer's interpretation.
Leaves a taste in your mouth.
It's a very art house ending.
Yes.
For a very straightforward film up until that point. And it says a lot that my mother, who watches, God bless her, a lot of shit that I throw at her. I mean, I would never like make her watch something that's just out of her comfort zone of misery or whatever.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like art house or whatever, she'll give anything a try and whatnot. And even she really liked the ending, and she would like wanted to talk about it and whatnot. So I definitely think that's a very good Oscar-y choice where you can see the prestige behind. Not necessarily the production, but just like the story and the kind of otherworldness of it, and yet it also doesn't really alienate its audience in too hard. So,
the other thing, and not to go on too much of a tangent on that particular film, but there's a lot of questions raised in that film, like when little children commit a crime, are they guilty?
Yeah. No, that wasn't my answer, but that is a question. Lock them up.
Lord.
Oh, wait a minute. We already do that as a country.
Now we're getting partisan.
Getting into it?
We're getting partisan. I don't mind it. We don't fucking care.
We're pretty partisan on this podcast.
Yes, we are.
It's not like the three of us disagree on most issues.
Yeah, we don't make it any. The few times where we actually like hint at the outside world outside of the film tank, we didn't tell you that the film tank is actually in a post-apocalyptic bunker.
Well, yeah. We all are.
Oh yeah.
Now, what's wonderful about that particular part of the film, though, is it is this like kind of just nonchalant, whimsical moment that happens, and you're like, "Oh, these children just committed a felony."
Yep.
But did they? I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't.
There are no crimes in Disney World.
That is patently false.
They're not in Disney World.
In fact, the crimes are probably even more severe for the fact that Disney is the law in Disneyland.
What obviously is one of the pulls of the movie is they're literally right next door to Disney in this weird trailer park. It's not an actual trailer park, but it is. Like, here's the poor section. We pretend this doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And but it's a good movie.
All because Disney wanted to build that park where he wanted to build it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad things about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That man stole all that land for the most part.
Yep.
Bought it.
Proud American tradition.
Well, I mean, there is an unfortunate amount of comparisons between he and Daniel Plainview when it comes to buying of the land.
To be fair, though,
make a Disney version of There Will Be Blood.
I abandoned my child. Oh, God.
I abandoned my child.
Smoke is billowing from behind the.
I'm finished.
That was like kind of a goofy. Anyway,
bastard
I
in
will
a
say
basket.
I'd be very remiss if we didn't point out, just because we are liberals, that when Walt Disney made that purchase of that land, Joe Biden was there on the front lines protesting that purchase and the transfer of the deed. So,
anyway.
Florida Project's a good movie. Sorry for taking us off on an 8-minute.
What movie were you talking about? Pulp Fiction?
Yeah.
yeah.
But we spent more time and more energy on Florida Project.
Yeah.
We should watch it someday, though.
We should.
We've come up with lots of those on this episode. It's always good.
Hell yeah. Write them all down.
If we were Dan, we would be writing it down furiously in our book right now.
That is true.
Yep.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Toussaint.
He's going to love that, actually.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so number 3 for me is a film that I've only seen once, and I'm going to have to be totally honest.
How dare you?
I fell asleep watching it.
This is not
Okay.
good.
Wait, how
but
can this get any worse?
No. But see, here's
I also watched it on mute.
No. I have been meaning to come back to this film because I know that this film is awesome, and I feel terrible. It wasn't for the fact of the film itself that I fell asleep. It's because I'm just a sleepy bitch, and I fall asleep all the time. It happens a lot.
I'm just a sleepy bitch.
I'm just a sleepy
Guess
bitch.
who's getting a shirt with that on for Christmas?
Oh my god! Like you guys know that. Like sometimes I fall asleep during.
No, we're aware. You're a little sleepy bitch.
I know. Yeah, whatever.
It's not you.
But
I'm
see,
guilty.
here's
You
the
are
thing.
too.
When
I don't
I
fall
was
asleep.
like when I saw this
Absolutely.
scene, I knew that this film was awesome, and I was trying to fight against the inertia of my ability of my necessity to sleep to watch it. Okay. And I still remember it, and I actually rewatched it today because it's that damn good of a scene. And it is from the Coen Brothers 2005 adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men, and is the scene between Javier Bardem's character Anton Chigurh and the gas clerk, the gas station clerk. That scene
Hello,
is
friendo.
Hello, friendo, and like he's just like they're just talking, just shooting the shit, it like Anton is so like not interested in talking to this old man and stuff, right? And he's
is he?
And then he like he makes like an offhand comment. It's like, oh yeah, so you're from Ohio, and he just there's a visible change in his demeanor, and I'm just like, why are you asking about that? And I'm just like, because this guy is now inquiring as to his origins.
Sir, why do you have an air tank with you?
Yeah, exactly. So then, like,
I can't breathe.
it goes from this back and forth where it's just a question of like, I need to close up because like he obviously doesn't feel safe around this person. Like, what time do you close up? I was like, I close up, when it gets dark. Dark is not like I close up around now. Now is not a time. What time do you close up? And it's like, I close up after dark. Do you live in that house over there? Yeah, I live in that house over there with your wife. Yeah, with my wife. It's like, oh yeah. It's like, do you own this land? It's like, well, like this place. It was owned by my wife's father, so I sort of married into. So you married into it. It's like, yeah, I guess it's mine too. And it's like, okay, we're gonna flip a coin. And then it's like the whole coin flip thing is like you have to call it. And I was just like, well, I don't know what we're betting. It's like we're betting everything. It's like you have to call it. And it's like, well, I don't want to call it. It's like, yes, you are. It's like I don't know what I'm putting up. And I'm just like, you've been putting it up your entire life. And then you realize you long ago realized the stakes of this actual encounter and the fact that he actually narrowly skirts away from what would probably be all but certain death on just a coin toss, and it's just like, don't put that in your
Not
pocket.
to mention,
that's your lucky coin.
For the audience too, at least first time watching it, that you wouldn't have expected the coin toss to matter. In that general kind of situation, and then you realize that that's how psychotic he is.
Oh yeah,
is that he'll do everything that he does, but also he's a man of his word, which makes him creepier.
That is, and I know me and you, Nick, watched this. I don't know, like a year ago or so.
Yeah, it was recently.
Yeah,
somewhat recently.
Yeah.
That is, I think, one of the more overrated films of the last decade and a half. That is completely saved by a fantastic performance. And
on part of Javier Bardem, or
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, Josh Brolin's good too, and so is Kelly MacDonald. Like it is just, it's not the Coen Brothers' best work.
But I even so, having said that, I think that scene alone is sort of indicative of some of the strengths of the Coen Brothers with regards to like actual like dialogue heavy scenes, and the fact that it was an adaptation. I just think that it works so well because I'm used to like the Coen Brothers dealing with this sort of like very quippy, like Midwestern drawl repartee, whereas this feels like it has an entirely different tone to it, but it operates at the same speed, but you can definitely like check that there's a totally different tempo and tone going on here.
I love, it's not a conversation, but I do love the scene when he has to get the medical supplies. He blows the car up to get everyone out of the pharmacy so he can go steal all the medical shit. Like that is, a really, really smart person, but at the same time a really dumb person.
Yeah.
And it's the encapsulation.
You're trying to swat a fly with an AK, and you managed to actually like get the fly. But did you really have to do that?
No, it's like he is a.
Well, and I think he knows what his strengths are.
Oh no, absolutely.
Which is only that, because he
Creating
sticks
chaos
out as a sore thumb otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's that is a plus conversation right there. Good call, Susan.
Yep. So that's my number 3.
Okay.
All right.
Oh boy.
My number 2.
Yep.
Is a very kind of touching and heartwarming conversation between a father and son.
Oh no.
In the movie Happiness.
Oh.
Wow.
A film from 1998.
I can't believe you've done this. I cannot believe you've done
you can.
I can, but I also cannot believe you've done
Joking
this.
aside about the tone of the scene, I remember when I first watched this movie, and of course, when you watch the movie itself, it's already harrowing at places, and certainly depressing and whatnot. But you never truly expect it to reach the heights of this scene, in my opinion.
Yeah, heights or depths.
Well,
it's all a matter of perspective, isn't
correct. It depends on what you call quality cinema.
Yeah. And I'm not even talking about quality. I'm talking about just.
That's what I mean by heights versus depth.
Right.
So, personally, this is kind of what I. Not always. Obviously, sometimes I also want to be entertained. But this is what I definitely, a lot of the time, want out of cinema. I want to be challenged in some way, because I'm not... so I guess I should really quickly recap and say this scene takes place between a father and son. The father, played by Dylan Baker.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the film, you, as the audience, know that this very boring milquetoast suburban
salaryman,
suburban dad
Yeah.
has one deep dark secret, which is that he is a pedophile and he's attracted to young boys. And the movie never once, including this scene, excuses that behavior, but it does mine the almost purgatorial hell that he's trapped in for some kind of pathos, whether you consider that to be comedy and or karmic.
I think he understands how hellish his existence is, and you're right. It doesn't excuse it. It doesn't try to sympathize it or empathize with it at all, but really it just starts to mine what it is like to be that kind of person in that kind of like situation.
Yeah, and
like it's just
for a film to do that,
Yeah.
and to do it in the presentation that it does during that scene, in which his son finally asks him point blank first he asked him basically for the sex talk. And when he kind of stumbles...
Which is fucked up in itself.
Yeah, he kind of stumbles his way through it while also being way too blunt for his the age of his audience, because he just gives a very didactic physical explanation of what sex is without any context, because he probably has no real emotional attachment to it in the normal sense because of his predilection in general.
Yeah.
And as it then blends from the sex talk to his son finally asking him point blank if he's a pedophile and if he had molested his friend, Ronald Farber. And the tears that are streaming down the boy's face, not even like the greatest actor, but it's just a wonderfully done scene. Then are matched by his own father after he completely admits it, as the two of them just start sobbing. I gotta say, that scene is a masterclass in cinema when it comes to editing, when it comes to acting, because I also don't think that that kid was present for Dylan Baker's responses, at least in some of them. Because of the way it's cut, and it's totally fine. He shouldn't have to have been, but it's edited very seamlessly and whatnot. And I gotta say that while I don't sympathize with Dylan Baker's character or his plight, at a certain point I can see the humanity behind his existence, which is frankly a good lesson to learn about any bad person, because unfortunately our enemies are humans, and if we deny that, then we will fail to understand what motivates them, what can trap them, whatever. And I appreciated the film basically stating that there are bad people out in the world and that they are next door and they are the very real person that you may even like because of what they do and what they
especially
don't do.
too, the time that this film came out, I don't want to say that this was ahead of its time necessarily, but this was something that would have not been out in the open at this time, like
1998.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
around the turn of the century, I feel like this is.
I mean, the Catholic scandal hasn't came up yet.
Well, it just the idea of not even necessarily understanding it, but at the same time, I don't want to say accepting it all.
No, but it did beat the trend too of cinematically of a very brief run of pedophilia-minded stories, whether it's American Beauty with Kevin Spacey, or
that did not age well.
Perfectly cast.
Or Little Children, in which this was kind of, I would say, a trend until it became a reality in real life, and then the scandal. I mean, it's always been a reality, but then we acknowledged it as such.
But this was bringing it to the forefront, but
with no resolution.
Well, because there isn't one,
right?
Yeah. Great performance by Dylan Baker, who is a completely underutilized performer for the most part.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine just getting that prompt and being like, okay, this is what I got to run with.
How about the oddly comedic ending to that scene too?
To that scene or to the movie, just so I make sure.
Isn't that scene where he ends it by saying that he would just jack off instead
Yeah.
of raping?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is so uncomfortable.
Yes, and I'm just going to spell it out for the audience in case they've never seen it, which is understandable. The kid, essentially, after he asked if he did molest his friend, does that, because he's a young boy, he's like, would you ever, and he says, would you ever fuck me? And the dad, through tears, sopping wet, says, of course not. I would only jack off to you. And that level of an actual hierarchical sexual scale.
Trying to
it kind of that breaks
to contrive a principle, pretense of principles. This is fucking. Oh my god!
If you listen,
it makes it even worse that you try to fucking create some type of hierarchy of principles around this fucking
I have limits.
Unrepentant act. Fuck you.
I'm a good man.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
I'm a gentleman. I'm a gentleman. It's like the house that Jack.
I wouldn't fuck my own child. I'm not a monster.
Oh
and
my
here's
god.
the thing, though. If you've listened, if you've listened to this podcast and you've listened to me speak, I often am probably the one who's the most okay with transgressive cinema in general.
There's a lot of films that I wouldn't have watched had you not introduced me to them, and
it's not that we're not against them.
No. But I mean, the one I'm usually the one who wants to watch.
Oh, you're driving the car,
salivating.
Yeah.
But I will
Give me the money!
say this scene is the closest, and it's actually not the scene itself between them as far as all the ensuing dialogue, but it is actually that final line that is maybe the closest my brain has ever been broken by a immoral line of dialogue where I can't quite even want to reconcile with it, and yet it begs to be reconciled with. And and it just fucks me up every time.
That movie, and I think we brought this up, or it wasn't on the episode. We were just chatting a month or two ago. But that movie starts with a really fascinating casting choice of John Lovitz,
who's actually great in it.
Oh, he is. But he's basically, we see him march himself to his suicide. And, God, what a great casting choice. I mean,
you think you're champagne, don't you? Well, you're not. You're shit.
That's a good movie.
It is a great movie.
That's a great movie, actually.
Definitely hard to watch, but I would encourage anyone to try it because I don't think you cannot watch it and at least, A, feel better about yourself, or
Absolutely.
not, if you don't know certain things about yourself, and B, to actually see something that is genuinely challenging, which I don't say about a lot of movies.
Yeah.
I will say,
I was challenged when I watched Avengers Endgame.
Well, we all were.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to say that we've arrived or anything like that, but I will say there have been a few recent experiences in the theater with independent cinema that I don't want to say goes too far, because I mean, there's what is too far.
It's a moving target. That happens
it is.
Every single,
But I feel like there are more people now on the wavelength of this kind of cinema than there were a decade ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think if this movie was like quote unquote remade today, where it was a similar thing and whatever, I think it would be accepted. But I think if you showed people this movie in and of itself as an artifact from 1998, it would be. It's hard to watch because Todd Solondz is not a visual filmmaker, so it is very didactic in its presentation of these subjects and these people and whatnot. So you really are living only in the headspaces, whereas someone like a lot of these indie directors who are doing great work are coming on the scene with such great, I should say, visual flair and just very out-of-the-box editing, whatever, that it does make certain things more palatable because what you're watching has a glossy veneer. But if you're going to watch Happiness, you're going to watch 2.5 hours of talking heads talking about the worst of humanity.
Yeah.
And nothing more. And if that sounds awful, then fine, don't watch it. But give it a try. Philip Seymour Hoffman's in it. And it's one of his greatest performances, even though it's obviously one of his most disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I mean... We didn't do an episode on that, did we?
No, we did not.
No, we did not.
We just watched it.
No, we did not. Sorry.
We watched it primarily because, I maybe even thought to do an episode one time, but never, whatever. But because you randomly one day said, hey, we should watch Happiness. And I was like, okay, the next time we get together, we're watching it.
Yep.
Don't read Wikipedia. I was just hell-bent on making sure that we actually got to watch it. So whatever.
You were like, I'm not going to look this gift horse in the mouth. I'm just going to run with it.
Yeah, no. The scene with Philip Seymour Hoffman, where he is pretty much given the opportunity to let his fantasy play out, and he just can't do it.
That's the thing about fantasies.
Well, yeah, he's much in the same vein of a lot of people in this current day and age. Like to live out their thoughts from afar, and then they get close, and nope.
Yeah, it's weird how there are human beings on the other side of your shit.
Yeah. Boy, we could really learn that lesson, couldn't we?
We could, yes.
Oh, some
bad
people should.
Cannot.
Well, what are bad people? Oh, boy. Okay. Believe it or not, I made it seem like there was only one Tarantino film on my list, but in fact, there is a second.
Okay, whatever
liar.
this scene is, I will say I was surprised when you said that earlier, that scene was your sole Tarantino, because if this is the scene that I think of it is, I was surprised that it would not be on there. So
okay. So the scene that I've chosen for my number 2 is the opening scene of Inglourious Basterds.
Yep, I figured as much.
Between Hans Landa and the
now
Frenchman.
I know I'm not crazy.
No. So just to set a scene for everybody, I've been a Tarantino fan for 15 years or so.
Card carrying member.
Sure, but I really was not on the Tarantino train during the Kill Bill years.
Which is funny because Kill Bill was actually my first introduction to Quentin Tarantino.
And they're not bad.
And for most people, I think it was it's one of those films.
I've been meaning for 5 years to go back and watch them straight through because I've seen bits and pieces again. But
they're fun.
Yeah. I will say that, and I've said this, and you can disagree or not, but Inglourious Basterds was the start of the true mainstream Tarantino resurgence, in my opinion.
I'd agree with that, in especially in this day and age of what we think about when we think about Tarantino. So I'm onto what you're saying.
Okay, So the wonderful thing about this opening scene and this particular conversation is all elements surrounding it, which is this is really the American introduction to Christoph Waltz, even though his career has fizzled a little bit. Clearly Tarantino knows what to do with this particular performer and puts him in an absolutely fantastic role where he's playing a just fucking terrible person as he is the Jew hunter during the later days of the Nazi regime in World War II. And the scene involves he and a bunch of his Nazi soldiers driving up to this Frenchman's house in the middle of, the south of France or somewhere. It's not Paris or anything like that. It's just a French farming village where this Frenchman and his 3 daughters, it has a very, whimsical feel to it. There's no mother in sight. One of the daughters is played by an early Léa Seydoux. This scene is basically Tarantino probably at his best, where he is writing just this terrible sort of villainous dialogue that is being masqueraded as this pleasant gentleman who has come calling and arrives to discuss everything with him. And basically he is getting all of the information from this Frenchman who's got his guard up but is still giving him everything, even though he thinks he's not. And this scene is incredible to start a film with because it is, for the most part, at the outset, very unassuming. You have a farm village, and you have a very pleasant gentleman coming in who's just trying to clear this man's family. And it is very much how, unfortunately, even though this takes a lot of liberties in terms of what actually probably really happened, unfortunately, probably
the most meaning of people can be coerced in becoming complicit in what is.
Well, and the other thing is, what else is this Frenchman supposed to do?
Right.
Like he's told, this guy comes in, he asks him for a glass of milk, he sits down, starts smoking his pipe, asks him, just because he says he doesn't know how to speak French, if they could speak English. Which is, I will say, a little.
Oh, he knows how to speak French. Yes,
yeah. But at the same time, that's a dual purpose from Tarantino, and that's where I feel like those kind of things are where he's at probably the height of his top talent, where it both serves an absolute purpose in the story, but also too he knows that this is going to mostly play for American audiences. Yeah. So we're going to speak this in English, and we then progress with this scene where he's discussing all of these family members from other farms in the area, and he sort of glosses past the people that he obviously knows are below them, and just continues this conversation with this man and drives him into basically having to admit in this sobbing moment that, yes, I have Jews in my house. And then Christoph Waltz's character of Hans Landa then changes the tone a bit and brings in some people to kill all the people in his basement. It is, I'll say that scene is basically cinematic mastery, in my opinion. Even if you don't love that film, and I know that there are a lot of people who, not that they don't like it, but are kind of hit and miss on that film, that scene is pretty much mastery from Tarantino.
Is it fair to say that is singularly the breakout role, if not the breakout scene for what's his name? Who's playing
Christoph
Waltz? When it comes to his introduction into U.S. cinema.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, he really had been non-existent up in that point.
Right. In the U.S., yeah.
Yeah,
right,
shows up in that film, wins an Oscar, and
Right.
then goes on to,
Right.
I mean, and his career, again, as I mentioned, has kind
He
of
went
fizzled a
on
bit.
to do the Green Hornet, and
he came back, won another Oscar with Tarantino in his next
He
film,
did that
Django
Bond
Unchained.
film that we don't like to talk about.
All joking aside, I mean, he's okay with what he had to work with.
You all right?
Yeah,
it's
wasn't
not his.
really the
It's
problem.
not his fault. He's not the worst part of that film.
No.
Okay.
But
hey, Léa Seydoux is in that movie.
that is true.
A reunion.
as a Bond girl.
Oh.
She gets her vengeance, sort of.
Meow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that scene ends after that very uncomfortable conversation between Hans Landa and Monsieur Lapetite, the Frenchman, with him murdering all of the Jewish residents who are living underneath his house, except for Shoshana, who played wonderfully by Melanie Laurent, has escaped. And that's
And when he says au revoir, Shoshana.
Well, that's a weird part because he obviously could kill her, but he decides to just let her go.
Yeah.
Is obviously it comes back to be his downfall at the end in a way, but at the same time, that is a pretty crackerjack ending to just a wonderful scene that is horrible, but at the same time wonderful to watch transpire, and really the height of the worst parts of humanity, especially when the conversation reaches Christoph Waltz comparing Nazi Germans to wolves and Jewish people to rats, and that they're the famine of the earth and that they need to be completely done away with, and they will result to anything to survive, and they will hide under floorboards, and this is the reason, trying to introduce this bullshit logic, and the reason of why this has happened, and we're not going to kill your family because you are trying to hide them, we're going to reward you because you're telling them that you're keeping them under here, and it's like, fuck these people and their basic bullshit, and this shit's going to keep happening time after time after time again, and it's going to keep happening because there are so many fucking stupid people out there who are just going to let this shit happen.
Tale as old as time.
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
But that's a wonderful scene, and Tarantino at top form, in my opinion. So that's Inglourious Bastards, and the scene between the Frenchman and Hans Landa is my number 2.
Nice. So, my number 2, this was a strong candidate for number 1, but I think that my number 1 is just personally just one of my favorites. So, just leaning into number 2, it is the discussion from Ex Machina between Nathan and Caleb regarding to the purpose or utility of Ava's sexuality. That is a conversation. There are multiple conversations in Ex Machina between Caleb and Nathan and Caleb and Ava that still resonate with me, that are the reasons why I come back to that film and why I enjoy that film so much. Even after having watched and talked about it as much as we have. But that one really sticks out to me because it really does sort of highlight what is so intrinsic and interesting about human consciousness and our conception of what consciousness is. And I'm just like, why do we have sexuality? It's like, well, it's like the reason why he put sexuality, why he prefaced sexuality into Ava, other than it being fun, is that it then creates it manufactures a sort of biological imperative for a outside observer to then engage with that entity that he has created. And it's interesting because he asked the question. I was like, is there any form of consciousness that doesn't have some type of like biological or sexual like dynamic to it? What imperative does a black box have to speak to another black box? And the whole idea of just even extrapolating that to the idea of gender or sexual preference, and whether those aspects are programmed or not, or elicited through either nature or nurture, and how much of those actually come into play through not only how we interact with others, but ultimately how we conceive of ourselves, and how much consciousness really is just a matter of the ability to tell stories about ourselves and to contextualize our own experience respective to that of other people's experience. And so that's just like a whole wormhole that is just really fucking fascinating to me. And it's just a brilliant encapsulation of like a really heady and fascinating a fascinating observation about not only artificial intelligence, but just of the question of like what, if anything, like meaningfully distinguishes like human consciousness from that of what we might observe from other forms of consciousness, and whether or not the observation of lesser consciousness is not due in part to other consciousness being lesser, but for the fact of our inability to interact with them and to engage and communicate with them.
Well, I'll also say, too, about that conversation, which is that while I would say a lot of the conversation in that movie certainly drives home or has this aspect, I think that conversation in particular is where it's at its most pointed, which is the fact that it's almost also kind of a meta-narrative when it comes to these a very patriarchal look at female autonomy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so the way these two males are essentially discussing her sexuality, whether it exists or doesn't exist, as something that is only beholden to their wants and needs, and in this case, literal manifestation. And obviously you could write about that through a lot of the scenes throughout the film, but it's there when it's those two guys literally, I would say, techno-drooling over the idea that this is possible. Not because they're, so into it that they're, whatever, but that's like, of course, why wouldn't this be a possibility?
And this is a construction.
What other purpose would she have after she outlives her purpose?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Like, this is a construction of Ava's gender that is not by somebody who is either sympathetic or shares the lived experience of that gender, but somebody who is just rather just like gawking at it and just like, this is how I boil down the utilitarian function of this gender. I'm just like,
not only that, but then how
what a fucking dick. And then he even slips in a really fucking awesome joke in the middle of that. Like, that's another cherry on top of like a really like heady, an awesome conversation.
There's a
what kind of girls do you like? What's your type? And I was like, my type? And I was like, you mean women?
Like,
it's like, no, salad dressing. I was like,
yeah, you like black chicks? Yeah.
So let's say it's black chicks.
It's
that got a rise out of me in the fucking theater. Yeah. Like, Jesus Christ.
An AI doesn't need a gender. She could have been a gray box.
Actually, I don't think that's true. Can you give an example of consciousness at any level, human or animal, that exists without a sexual dimension?
They have sexuality as an evolutionary reproductive need.
What imperative does a gray box have to interact with another gray box? Can consciousness exist without interaction? Anyway, sexuality is fun, man. If you're going to exist, why not enjoy it?
My real question was, did you give her sexuality as a diversion tactic?
I don't follow.
Like a stage magician with a hot assistant.
So a hot robot who clouds your ability to judge your AI?
Exactly. So, did you program her to flirt with me?
If I did, would that be cheating?
Wouldn't it?
Caleb, what's your type?
Of girl?
No, of salad dressing. Yeah, of girl. What's your type of girl? You know what? Don't even answer that. Let's say it's black chicks. Okay? That's your thing. For the sake of argument, that's your thing. Okay? Why is that your thing? Because you did a detailed analysis of all racial types and you cross-referenced that analysis with a points-based system? No. You're just attracted to black chicks. A consequence of accumulated external stimuli that you probably didn't even register as they registered with you.
Did you program her to like me or not?
I programmed her to be heterosexual, just like you were programmed to be heterosexual.
Nobody programmed me to be straight.
You decided to be straight? Please, of course you were programmed. By nature or nurture or both. And to be honest, Caleb, you're starting to annoy me now because this is your insecurity talking. This is not your intellect.
It's a really simple thing, but a great thematic moment when they are both walking up the hill and they reach the exact same spot, and then Domhnall Gleeson stops to like take a breath, and Oscar Isaac starts going back up to the other top of the hill. God, it's just simple shit like that that just gives me hope that Alex Garland is going to be this fantastic filmmaker at some point in his career.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
I think that he has it in him. Yeah.
I mean, that conversation's the conversation early on where the two of them are discussing. He's just wanting to like get, what do you think about her? And Caleb starts to like try to like sound smart.
Yeah.
And he just like gives
stop trying to intellectualize everything. I just want simple, straight answers.
Well, he gives him this detesting look, like he just like thinks he's the scum of the earth. Like, God damn it, you're not smart.
Yeah.
Just tell me if you want to fuck her or not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What a great film. We come back to it probably every 4 episodes on this podcast.
Yeah, because
but
it's fucking
Good
great.
movie.
It's probably one of the best films to be released in like the past 10 years. So
Yeah.
So we've arrived at number 1.
We've arrived at the summit.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Here
always
we are.
always a great time on these episodes, but it's fun to always go through and hear what everyone's thoughts are and why they've arrived at their certain selections. But we always get to the top. It's always great to hear what was the very tippy top of everyone's list. So this will be fun. Number 1.
Well, my number 1 is from a 1993 movie by Mr. Mike Leigh entitled Naked, starring David Thewlis. In this movie, David Thewlis plays a vagabond named Johnny, who ends up couch surfing his way because he's homeless and degenerate, so he can't quite keep a job and or any place of residence, although he would probably say that that's on purpose. And as he makes it to his friend's house, who's also an ex-lover, eventually he overstays his welcome by only a few hours there and is forced to go commingle on the street for a while. And while he's out and about, he meets Brian, the security guard, who is doing his night job. And Brian sees him out in the cold and invites him in because he's a nice person. And the 10 to 15 minute sequence that ensues from that point on is probably what I have in my mind as cinema made for me. I mostly just want to see two people talking shit and spouting off philosophical ideas nonstop, but not in a completely dry way, because I think Doug Johnny, played by David Thewlis, is certainly a cad and a little rascal, and he is so charming at being an asshole, in this particular instance, an intellectual asshole, that I find it just fascinating to watch. And the conversation that ensues between the two of them, where Johnny picks on Brian, even though Brian has graciously let him in from the cold for the night, but he picks on Brian to validate his own existence and the importance of his own job, is just endlessly fascinating. It runs the gamut as a conversation between a personal level of what Brian's existence, or Johnny's for that matter, means in the grand scheme of things, to ridiculous conspiracy theories where he cites both Bible books, to Nostradamus, to the number 666, to barcodes and how that is the mark that will, signal the apocalypse. And they just keep going through all this. And Brian is such a well-written one-off character, because we only get to see him exist in this scene.
I've only seen the film the once, but he's definitely the polar opposite of him, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But he's not in a truly argumentative way. Mostly just in a,
no, but he's
this
trying,
is what I believe.
He's trying to be the answer to his questions.
Absolutely. And what I like, of course, about that scene is that at the end of the day, they're more alike than they would probably admit, because there's a great exchange where, of course, at one point Brian says, because Johnny mentions God, and Brian says, you don't believe in God. And then Johnny says, of course I fucking believe in God, which is actually probably true, because Johnny can't quite explain, and he would be the first to admit, because he famously in the movie earlier says that you can read as many books as you want, but there will always be things that you never, ever, 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 ever fucking understand. And so Johnny is also the first person to admit that he is a cosmic blip that means nothing in the vast universe of everything. But his tango with Brian, the security guard, is great. The opening, when he first gets there and he sees what Brian has to do for a living, which is he literally has a little gadget that pings his, shall we say, there are stations set up aside throughout this entire office building. I think he said there's like 27 in total. So what he has to do is every 4 minutes be at the next one to register that he was there and that he checked everything. And Johnny, of course, says, well, couldn't they have trained small chimp to do that, or a big chimp with a big chimp, and then he says a small chimp with a bigger device, and he's like, I suppose they could, but and then he's like, well, isn't that pretty meaningless? And he's like, well, I don't know. I mean, this isn't this technically recording my existence every four, and that's what starts this whole thing, and it just goes into this huge whirlwind of ideas, and it's also very much built into Johnny's need to be in a moment where he hates other people because he finds himself inferior to them or superior to them, and yet he also needs other people because without them he can't.
No one's listening to his bullshit.
He has nothing to measure.
Right,
like,
he
his
can't
own
validate himself on his own principles.
Right.
He needs other people to spout them off and to put down and whatnot. And I just absolutely love that scene. There's so many great
He's a malignant narcissist.
Yeah, and I love when Johnny first comes in too, when he lets him in from the cold. He's like, and what goes on in this postmodern gas chamber? And he's like, nothing, it's empty. And he goes, well, what exactly do you guard? Because he's a security guard. He's like, space. And he's like, well, that's pretty fucking stupid, because I can come in here, steal the space, and you would never know because it's fucking space. And that's when they go off on their, tangent and whatnot. But yeah, no, it's just fantastic because the two of them get so wrapped up in each other's ideology, and this was, I mean, in so many other movies, this is kind of like a meet cute in some way because these two people are actually having a profound experience with the other. And I don't think Johnny completely hates Brian, and nor does Brian get completely annoyed by Johnny because they keep entertaining each other and each other's ideologies. But at the end of the day, that's all Johnny was made for, are these passing moments with other people that he will always overstay. And that also ties into what they're talking about, which is that Johnny considers himself and humanity at large, a passing fad, and that, humans are just, as he puts it, a crap idea. And that's kind of what he excuses his own behavior as to be okay with and whatnot. But the two of them, I think it's just a microcosm of that movie as a whole, but definitely as what I personally love about cinema, which is two people just going at it and relentlessly trying to trip the other person up.
The other thing that's great about both that scene and that film in general is that David Thewlis's character of Johnny pretty much encapsulates everything that he despises.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of what Johnny says, and especially in this scene, is this vapid, conspiratorial, language, and yet when he says it, he's slightly charming in his repulsiveness, that he is an intellectual at heart, and whether that gives him any credence to what he says really shouldn't, and yet it does, because especially of the way David Thewlis plays it. And I'd be lying if I just thought that Johnny, no matter the fact that he's a horrible person when it comes to morals and whatnot, especially if you've watched the opening scene of that movie, he is an undeniably entrancing figure to watch on his cinematic night odyssey that he takes on that one night. And there are so many other fascinating conversations in that movie, like the one but the exact opposite of this one in that movie is where he meets the guy who will not stop shouting his girlfriend's name, and so then he just starts shouting it too, and so he is able to literally dumb himself down and be as vapid as the person he is, talking to. But when he meets someone unexpectedly, like Brian the security guard,
it throws him off.
It does, and it makes him even more smarter than he appeared back, a few scenes ago.
Or does it?
Or does it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, the scene in which I entitled Johnny and the Security Guard from the movie Naked is just pretty much the epitome of the kind of movies I like, which are people in a room just shooting the shit and making me think. And I would say, too, that even though it's such an intellectual scene, I would say, for me at least, it's a slightly emotional one, because I think Johnny is kind of taking a liking to Brian as a person, as a friend or whatever, and yet his nihilism just digs him deep into not letting him actually cross over the aisle to extend an olive branch in any type of argument and whatnot. And yet, if he would just let himself connect with other people in a way that he doesn't, you can see that he could have these very fruitful conversations and relationships with other people. He's just more interested in himself than he is with others.
Well, and the other thing about Johnny, even though with the character he is, We've talked about this through different characters throughout time on this podcast, but he is definitely a character who hates himself more than anybody else, even though he has a very high opinion of himself.
He hates everybody. He hates himself more than anyone else.
And he'll be the first one to be proud to say it because he'll think that somehow makes him smarter and you know. And I've been
intellectual self-flagellation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, I would say Johnny is a horrifying cinematic idol of mine, which is I never want to be like him, and yet sometimes at my worst moments I feel like him.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well put.
Yeah.
Nick. Oh, boy.
Oh, boy.
Okay, moving on to my number one. Actually, this is the one that includes somebody from a previous conversation.
Okay. Is it James Caan?
It is not.
Ah.
I was actually going to say earlier that I actually feel really bad that James Caan's career has went down the shitter because I actually think he's a really good performer.
He is when he tries.
Yeah. That's okay. So, anyways, the film I'm going to have is a film filled with many, many, many great conversations, as this is a film that is just a collection of two-person conversations, and you could really pick a majority of the conversations throughout this film and say, why is this great and why is this enjoyable and whatever. But I picked the one that is probably the loudest and the best out of the bunch, and that is the that is the scene from the script written by Aaron Sorkin in Steve Jobs, in the fabulous scene between Michael Fassbender and Jeff Daniels, where the characters of Steve Jobs and John Scully are basically hashing out their shit after some shit went down many, many years ago. And even though obviously this film takes a lot of creative liberties, this particular scene, one of the reasons why I love it so much is because this is a scene that really encapsulates the idea of a conversation hitting a crescendo, as it starts out very slow, builds up throughout, and then hits a fever pitch as people are shouting at each other, but for good reason. And also, too, it is weirdly, because it's a pretty mainstream movie, Steve Jobs is, but this character that Steve Jobs is throughout, and the character of John Scully are these weird, egotistical people that obviously have very high opinions of themselves, but also low opinions of themselves at the same time. And I'm not trying to compare it at all to the conversation from Naked, but at the same time, the idea of matching wits of two people who actually don't like themselves is very apparent.
And the value that they think the other is going to place upon that, even though the other person doesn't give as much of a shit about them as they think that they would.
Yeah. And we do see conversations in every single part of Steve Jobs, as there are three main sections of the film for anyone who hasn't seen it. We see conversations between Michael Fassbender and Jeff Daniels in every one of those three sections. But this one is definitely the most shouty, the most emotional, and also, too, probably the most fulfilling, I would say, as we see Steve Jobs, at least in this film, at his absolute lowest, where he has been fired from Apple, the company he helped create, and he's now basically creating this shell company, and just in hopes that he gets hired back by Apple. And the idea of him just trying to make Jeff Daniels feel bad about having him fired, but at the same time also let him know that he doesn't feel bad about it, although he clearly does, is fantastic. And this scene does linger on for probably a good 9 minutes. Yeah. And it is really good. I mean, Jeff Daniels is a really weird actor because he has had just a very bizarre career. I mean, the idea of him being in stuff like Dumb and Dumber, and then being on...
To be fair, he said, not to be fair, but just in general, behind the scenes, he said he mostly took Dumb and Dumber because he was tired of doing some of the roles that he was doing prior to it. So he took that in a very self-aware way and not in a Johnny Depp, I'm going to put on a costume and be silly.
But, to be fair to myself... Yeah. That's my introduction into Jeff Daniels.
Oh, same here. Yeah.
assume that's who that is.
Right.
This
Actually,
scene,
my introduction was Fly Away Home, starring him and Anna Paquin about the ducks. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Lord.
That was a great movie when I was a kid.
That is the first time that film has been referenced on this podcast.
Probably in 20 years by anybody.
I love the film Steve Jobs. It was my favorite film from that year. It is one of my 50 favorite films of all time.
Oh, wow.
If you've never seen it or only seen it once, it is, I don't know if it's at his best, but it is Aaron Sorkin delivering just diarrhea's worth of dialogue throughout a film, and really hitting on a lot of levels on a super relevant topic when it comes to Silicon Valley and Apple and the idea of the advancement of technology through the late 20th and early 21st century.
The egos and ideas that sort of built that.
Well, and the idea that it did really just start with these two guys in their garage, and they built this trillion-dollar company for the most part.
Yeah.
And you have this extremely depressed person in Steve Jobs who has very low self-worth, but at the same time creates this persona of being this larger-than-life god-like figure.
Yeah.
He even talks about how proud he is in the first section of this ridiculous commercial that they've created about their product, which Jeff Daniels delivers a fucking fantastic.
I thought you meant that.
What's that?
Fecking.
Oh, no, sorry.
Anyway, I watched a bit too much of a Irish sitcom named Father Ted where they say fecking all the time.
Sorry, Ben.
No.
I wish I would have been on the same wavelength, but I have no idea what that is. Yeah. Anyways, he delivers this, and he talks about that same Super Bowl ad as he previously worked with Pepsi, saying, you know what, we also didn't have this grand ad, but we also didn't say that people would die if they didn't fucking buy our soda. It just gets down to the crux of it, which is that Steve Jobs has created this ridiculous ideal that this phone or this computer or this music player is this thing that it is not, which is this grand instrument of humanity, when in reality he's created just this computer and he's trying to sell it for lots of money.
But also, to his credit, like, does Apple even work if they don't talk about their products like that? Like, that has been their MO.
That's their brand.
Since they became what they are now.
Yeah.
And
it's a lot of posturing that they then sort of like manage to measure up in subsequent generations, and then like
in fairness,
they have,
I was gonna say, it's brought up. What do? You don't, you don't create anything. I am the conductor, and since Steve Jobs died, what have they done to innovate?
Yeah.
It's true, and it's one of those things where it's like Apple is the only company I can think of that actually made keynote presentations part of their public brand.
Yeah.
Which is fucking crazy to think. But
that became ultra popular.
Yeah. No, I mean, when I was like in like late middle school, early high school, I was watching those every WDCC. And I no longer watch them because I'm no longer an Apple fanboy because I'm an adult. And I will say that
because I know not to conflate my own like identity.
And
with
I say that as
of
someone who has Apple products like
Right.
an iPhone, and yes, I will probably almost always have a Mac computer because I grew up on it.
Right.
But like I bought a Chromebook the other day. I'm branching out. But yeah, actually, one thing I will say too about that movie is that if I had to pick just for fun a scene from that film, it would have actually, for me, been the scene you just referenced between him and Steve Wozniak. Not the final one, but the one where they talk over by the chairs and.
The great thing about that middle part is it's the same section that the
I was gonna
conversation
say,
happens
it's part
with
of
Jeff
that.
Daniels. Is that it is not the beginning or the end, it is the middle where all of this shit is clear, but at the same time, like, these are people just living their lives, and they have to fucking deal with each other.
And it's Steve Wozniak, the character at least, at his most frustrated when he finally just asks, "What do you do?" You know, and it's no matter what Steve Jobs' answer is in that movie, like there's nothing more poignant than Steve Wozniak even presenting that question to a person like Steve Jobs.
But the idea that Steve Jobs would give any response other than a demeaning response,
Right, yeah.
and that's just a really, really, really good movie. I mean,
it's a great movie for conversations.
It is. It is, and Aaron Sorkin's a great. Even if it's a film that you
I
don't-
will.
Oh, go ahead. Yep.
I was sorry. I was really quickly going to say, if I had an honorable mention, one thing that just missed the top 6 for me was the opening bar scene in The Social Network.
Oh yeah,
between Jesse Eisenberg and Rooney Mara's
That's a
character.
great scene. Yeah.
So that was pretty much right on the cusp, and it only didn't make it because of the other 6. But that's pretty much the epitome of me locking me in a room for 5 minutes with 2 characters just doing screwball dramatics by Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah, you're going to think that girls aren't going to like you because you're a nerd, and I want you to honestly know that it's not because of that. It's because you're a fucking asshole. And I was like, yes.
Yep. That is accurate.
Man, a lot of people need to hear that fucking line. Holy shit.
Well, I mean, not to go off anything further, we've had an entire episode on Steve Jobs on this podcast before. But Michael Fassbender delivers a Oscar-worthy performance that he unfortunately missed out on because of Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant. Even though I love that movie, that was bullshit. Clearly, Michael Fassbender is a much better performance in this particular film, in my opinion. And he is just this terrible person who wants to say that his daughter is not his, and his...
While at the same time claiming her in some way.
No, I mean, that's a through line
sense.
throughout the film,
Yeah.
but at the same time...
he tries to hide his emotional investment, so to speak, I would say, in that he wants nothing to do with any of the hard work that comes along with it, but he would gladly take credit for any of her more positive
Man, the patron saint of deadbeat dads. What a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
What a genius fucking idiot.
I was going to say, Steve Jobs, though, through his flaws, obviously still goes down as a, I don't want to say a martyr, but he's
definitely...
He went down at a good time for himself.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like if he would have went on further, could have been, I don't want to say that, like, it's good that he died or anything like that,
No.
but, like, people like...
He would have gotten canceled.
Well, people like Kurt Cobain dying when he did at the height of his popularity, it's good for people to remember him like that, where now people be like, oh, that asshole.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck that guy. Anyways, so I love that film and that scene, and that was my number 1.
Yeah. So, my number 1 is very interesting because I have been, like, basically leading up to this moment now in this episode, I've been sort of like ping-ponging between 2 conversations involving the same characters between 2 films. And we've already talked about these films on this podcast before, but then I realized that what is not important is necessarily the substance, but the performance that elevates it. That's the reason why it speaks so personally to me that it is on the top of this list, that I have to mention it. And as soon as I thought of it, I knew it was going to be at the top of this list. So I have to say my number 1 is from the movie The Matrix. It is the conversation between Neo and the Oracle.
Yep.
Gloria Foster. The reason why I guess that the conversation is on my mind again is because there's the recent news and rumors and like the sort of rumblings of a possible continuation of the Matrix franchise, the Matrix series, guided by the Wachowskis.
Nope. Not interested.
And I totally understand that.
It sounds like it's happening.
It sounds like it's happening, whether we want it to or not. Well, guess
Christopher Lloyd just talked about how he wants Back to the Future to come back.
Hey,
please don't.
Hey, Alex, now you know how I felt when I heard about the announcement for a Ghost in the Shell film let alone a fucking Akira film. Okay, I listed those 2 films on my fucking like top 6 for this episode for like singular moments, and now I get to see them. I got to see one of them being just like absolutely butchered by like this. Honestly,
you know what's
competent
coming for the next one.
Oh, it is, but I'm just bracing myself for it, just getting ready.
You're trying to be hopeful, but I'm trying to be
hopeful, but you know what? You know what's on.
You know what's coming.
You know what's on the other side of that door. But anyway, so
God damn it.
Thinking about like the possibility of a new Matrix film and how even one would even work after the original trilogy, whether it should be like either a whole reboot or should it be it could be a reboot and it could be a continuation given the nature of that actual like series itself and like the cyclical nature of it. But just thinking about like, there are some things that cannot be necessarily replicated from that time, and one of them is just the masterful performance of Gloria Foster, who unfortunately passed away before the final installment in that trilogy and needed to be recasted and sort of like retconned.
She was saved.
She in my opinion is the most important character in the Matrix trilogy. More so than Neo, more so than Morpheus, more so than Trinity, more so than Smith. I feel like the gravity and the matriarchal wisdom and insight that she brings to just the one scene that she's in that film, let alone in the second film. That's what I'm ping-ponging between the two of them, because they're both fucking great scenes that not only like show off a masterful performance, but also just sort of encapsulate what are the core themes of those respective films. And the fact of like her just, and the fact that bringing the two together just really just brings out what is the best in both of those. It honestly just like elevates both of those scenes by having seen both of them. It's awesome. Just the whole nature of how she actually talks to Neo and just like entreats him and doesn't like give him the solid answers that he might be looking for, because it's not about that's the whole point of her whole dialogue, that it's like, I could tell you who you are, but that's not going to be who you are. You're just going to be following in a performance of somebody else. Like, you really have to come to your own answers and understand that there is a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And that's something that even Morpheus said at the end, because he knew that he probably had an exact same conversation just like that, and he came to that realization on his own. And it's just like how she talks about, it's like being the one is like being in love. Like, nobody can tell you that you are. You just know it. Bones to brain. You just know it. And you just got to get it through your fucking head, dum-dum. You just got to listen. You got to actually hear what it is that I'm saying versus what you want to hear. And, like, I feel like that just the nature of that conversation itself is in such stark defiance to a lot of the fucking like theories that are like thrown at this fucking film. And I'm just like,
we all know Tucson's favorite.
You really gotta just fucking listen to what this woman is saying. Just listen to her. It's like,
what do you mean? Without him?
Are you sure you want to hear this? Morpheus believes in you, Neo. And no one, not you, not even me, can convince him otherwise. He believes it so blindly that he's going to sacrifice his life to save yours.
What?
You're going to have to make a choice. In the one hand, you'll have Morpheus's life. And in the other hand, you'll have your own. One of you is going to die. Which one will be up to you. I'm sorry, kiddo, I really am. You have a good soul. And I hate giving good people bad news. Oh, don't worry about it. As soon as you step outside that door, you'll start feeling better. You'll remember you don't believe in any of this fate crap. You're in control of your own life. Remember? Here. Take a cookie. I promise by the time you're done eating it, you'll feel right as rain.
It's a great scene and conversation because in a franchise especially that's so, I would say, rigid, which I don't mean in a bad way, but just adherence to a certain set of coding and rules as to what this universe can do and whatnot. It's such a good dressing down of the Matrix and the fantasy that you would have of what the Matrix can and cannot do.
Right.
And it humanizes a very cold concept of what the Matrix is. Which
and
is,
the fact that humanization comes through the dialogue of a character that is functionally inhuman, and yet that we learn in the next film why that inhuman character is able to do what they do, and why are they so fundamentally, momentously important to all of the events that we are watching transpire on screen. And it's like from and now I'm just gonna ping pong from like that one to the second performance from Gloria in the second film, where it's just like she explains that there's no such thing as fucking magic in the Matrix. Like everything that you see is just an extension of a program that's doing something that it's not supposed to be doing. And obviously that's meant to foreshadow the fact of like the ghosts that like show up with the Merovingian and other stuff like that. But really it's also talking about her own nature, the fact that like, you know, she doesn't come out and say it. It's like, but she can't tell the future. Right. And so really, how is it then that she is able to give off the appearance that she is predicting these things? And then when you understand that, and when you finally coheres as to who she is, what is her nature, what is the nature of the Matrix, like that is such a colossal like revelation. And the fact that it's just hiding in plain sight like that, it's just so well done.
It's a great rebuke too of what Neo believes his journey is going to be,
right,
because he only gets seduced by the idea not simply to unplug and finally be conscious of this world at large, but because he thinks that this will lead to a more, shall we say, forward thinking and fulfilling destination.
Exactly.
And yet he's of course being told a very cold hard truth, which is just because you have knowledge of the world around, more knowledge, does not mean you're going to be any more enlightened of your place within it.
Right, exactly. And really that it just comes down to grappling with that fact and finding the answers for yourself. And like, there's
if I can really quickly, that particular scene in the first film makes the payoff at the very ending that much better.
Yes.
Because this idea of him basically thinking that because she's given him a non-answer that it's an answer in and of itself, and that he then obviously believes in himself at the ending and has that fantastic finale where he stops the bullets and everything. That ending would not have been as good without that scene that precedes it, you know, an hour before in the runtime.
Right.
So, yeah, no, that's... And that scene, even though it's kind of a not, like, integral part of that scene, when he knocks over the vase.
But even then, that then foregrounds, like, once you, like, come back to that after having watched the second film and, like, learned about that stuff, like, holy fucking shit. Holy fucking shit. It's not that the vase is prone to break, it's that the vase always breaks, and this is not the first time that we've met. This is not the first time that we've done this shit. Like, oh my god. And it's not like communicated to you through like this smash cut like montage of like different people walking through that same door, but it basically like comes at you with the same force of that effect. It just doesn't lay it out as obviously, and I really enjoy that. But there is one line, I guess, from the second scene from the second film that I've come back to recently. I don't know, just down about the state of the world in general, and just like the scene where Neo was talking about, it's like, well, so why are you helping us? And like she basically says, like, you know, we're all here to do what we're all here to do. It's like there's only one thing that I really care about, Neo, and that's the future. And believe me, I know the only way that we're gonna get there is together. And I was just like, I really needed to hear that. Holy shit. I miss Gloria Foster so much. I'm actually like, if this is just like sort of talking out loud. It's like if there is more news that moves on, like a Matrix film being announced or like even being shown and stuff like that, I definitely would like to pitch an article like talking about like the significance of Gloria Foster's role in those original films, and what that's just one thing that why the Matrix franchise, the Matrix series, is so enduring and something that just cannot be replicated by in a continuation, but you still have to go on despite it.
So here's
yeah.
the only thing I will say about, and I'm getting away from the conversation aspect, but about the Matrix and the idea of there being another film.
Yeah.
The only reason I would be at all interested in another film is to sort of make good on the shit final film of that series. And I don't feel like that would be the reason why, so I'm not that interested.
Yeah, I think that, and we've already sort of had this conversation before, is like I can...
Just like the vase.
Yeah, just like the vase.
No, you've got an absolute classic film, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You've got a really good film, and you've got a fucking turd.
Yeah,
And-
I mean,
and-
it just sort of comes down to the fact that like the second and the third film are essentially one film, just split down the middle.
Well,
and the
not-
second
not-
and the
not if-
second
not
half
if you
is not that
separate
good.
Not if you separate
I know exactly. It's like thematically they're basically like encircling the same drain. Yeah, that third film, I don't have anything like very like.
Yeah,
very
there's
effusive
there's
to say.
not much there.
There's not a lot there. But even then, like taken as a whole, I feel like those two sequels, for whatever their faults, and their faults are apparent, they do meaningfully build out the universe of the Matrix in such a way that then we're able to then come back to the first film and see things from a different light.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Really quickly, I just want to throw something at you here, just to help you with your article. Did you know that Neo is an anagram of the word one?
Oh, yeah, I did.
Oh, I feel stupid.
Yeah, blew my mind. Oh, wow. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Anyway, that is my number one, sitting at the top of the pile, sitting at the top of the mountaintop. Yeah.
The tippy top, as Alex
the tippy top,
very elegantly put it earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Neo and the Oracle from the Matrix, yeah.
The tippy top. Ah, damn. Well, if anyone out there listening to this episode has any sort of conversations from a film that you really enjoy that you wanted to let us know about, always feel free to send them on to us at filmtankshow@gmail.com. To find our episodes, you can always find us on filmtankshow.com. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts or on Stitcher at Film Tank Show, where always you can go and rate or review our podcast, which is awesome. And you can try to find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Film Tank Show. Coming up on our next episode, a friend of ours is going to be here, and her name is Sam.
Hi.
And she's great.
Yay.
And she's going to be joining us for an episode on a film that I am fucking dreading, which is the new Ari Aster film, Midsommar.
Yay! Jazz hands.
A24.
A24. A24.
Oh, boy. Ooh. So, I'm not sure about this one, but at the same time...
That's because you stupid.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. I will say, just from a little bit of the promotional material, I am cautiously optimistic about maybe enjoying this film.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Yeah. But Hereditary, obviously...
I think you mean Hereditary.
garnered a pretty solid following, and this is pretty crazy that Ari Aster was able to throw this whole thing together in under a calendar year. So, Midsommar is going to be the next film we talk about on this podcast.
Woo.
So, looking forward to that coming up on episode 197. From Tucson Egan and Nick Cheney, myself, Alex Diekman, thank you very much for joining us on this Top 6 Film Conversation episodes. We'll be catching up with you next time here on Film Tank.
Take it easy.
All right.